I'm Alan Borsick. I work over here, and I am honored to be the one welcoming you this morning. We do a lot of serious subjects in this room. Mike Goucher, who I'll be introducing momentarily, does his On the Issues programs here, candidate debates, conferences. There aren't many serious subjects that are more serious than what we are dealing with today, and that makes it a special and especially valuable event. So I welcome all of you here because you're involved in the issues we will be discussing today about youth mental health, bullying, suicide, in general, how to help more kids. What's more important than that? I read columns for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel most every weekend about K-12 issues. In the spring of 2017, I wrote a column, and the gist of it really was, I don't even know quite what I'm talking about, but everywhere I'm going these days, among educators, I'm hearing that the mental health issues are really serious, and they've gotten more serious. And as I said, I don't even know what that means, but I know we've got to be paying attention to that. And I got a lot of reaction to that column because in my own kind of naive way, I think I was picking up on something, and we're picking up on it here. Today, we've got an excellent program, really excellent speakers, and I hope we can really focus on what moves things forward. This conference began with an overture from Rory Linnane of the Journal-Sentinel and of Gannett, Wisconsin. Gannett, Wisconsin and the Journal-Sentinel have been focusing now for 3 years on a project they call Kids in Crisis. And we at Marquette are honored to be part of this effort now and putting the spotlight on what can be done to help. So I want to start out by thanking Rory and the Journal-Sentinel and Gannett, Wisconsin for taking the lead on this, and we're glad to join in. And when I say we, I mean Marquette Law School, which we are always eager to be a crossroads and a convener for serious discussion. And our partner in sponsoring this, the Marquette College of Education. What's more important these days, one of the really important issues is producing really great educators, and they have a long record of that. In fact, we have not even with the intent of doing it, several of the speakers this morning are Marquette College of Ed graduates. So we want to thank Dean Bill Hank for being a partner with the Journal-Sentinel and with us. We will have several sessions, and then a break, then a couple more sessions. I'll be the one kind of introducing things. But the first thing I want to do is to introduce Jim McHenry of Gannett, Wisconsin, and let him say a few words about their valuable involvement.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Jim Fitzhenry. I'm an editor with USA Today Network in central Wisconsin, and really pleased to be here today. Why are we here today? A recent headline in The Economist explained it succinctly. Generation Z is stressed, depressed, and exam obsessed. The headline was based on a Pew Research survey of teens aged 13 to 17. 70% of teens see anxiety and depression as a major problem among their peers. 55% said bullying is a major problem. Mental health and bullying for teens ranked higher than issues like drug addiction, drinking, poverty, pregnancy, and gangs. As a journalist, I didn't need a survey to know that things were happening in our communities with our young people. We were hearing about and reporting on teen suicide with alarming frequency. So much so that in the spring of 2015, we asked reporters in 10 of our newsrooms in central and northeastern Wisconsin to fill out a survey about teen suicide and what was happening in our communities. What we found led to the creation of the Kids in Crisis series, which is currently in its 4th year of publication. Over that time, we've produced more than 120 pieces of original reporting. The The series now includes a podcast, This Is Normal, and led to a partnership with Milwaukee PBS for a documentary that'll be airing on PBS on May 16th. Including today's event, we've held 36 town hall meetings across Wisconsin, from Marshfield to Madison and Milwaukee. The basic storyline hasn't changed much since then. Teens in Wisconsin are experiencing high levels of anxiety and depression. Bullying has been amplified by social media, leaving kids feeling isolated and tormented. As a result, teens here in Wisconsin are dying from suicide at rates much higher than the national average. Tragically, access to treatment ranges from difficult to impossible depending on where you live. There are some parts of Wisconsin where there is only one psychiatrist for whole areas in the state. The remarkable thing about Kids in Crisis hasn't been our ability to share bad news. What's been uplifting is bringing people together to combat the stigma surrounding mental health. That remains the #1 issue, is getting people to talk about it. And by having people here today, we're making a big difference. Anecdotally, we see more teens speaking out about their battles and the power of healing. Some of the solutions we've outlined in our reporting are being implemented, such as additional state dollars for school-based treatments and hiring additional counselors and social workers in schools. The biggest cause for hope comes when people come together to develop solutions. I'm proud and humbled to return home to Marquette to join you today in finding answers. And I'd like to introduce Peggy Troy, President and CEO of Children's Hospital, for a few remarks. Children's Hospital has been an integral partner with the Journal-Sentinel to help bring the series to Milwaukee.
Thank you so much, and thank you. It's so gratifying to see all of you in this room today who are here for the purpose of really coming together about one of our most precious assets and resources in our community, and it is our kids. I want to also thank Mike and Amy Lovell. Mike couldn't be here today. There was a basketball game yesterday, and there's one today. But Mike and Amy have done a lot in stepping out in this community to really say, hey, this is a topic we need to be talking about. We need to understand what the dynamics are, because our kids, as Jim said, are living in crisis. And when you look at the data and the statistics, it's very alarming. I also want to thank Rory and Dave and Jim at the Journal-Sentinel for really taking this on for the 4th year in a row, because I think the more that we can talk about this topic and this issue, the more we're going to really collectively find solutions. We're a strong community. We have wonderful assets and resources, and I know collectively, we can do something about this in a meaningful way. Because we all do have a common bond, whether it's your own kids, your neighborhood, your schools, wherever kids happen to be. I think we all can agree that they deserve to grow up to be resilient and successful and come to Marquette Law School and give back to the communities, because that's what every kid wants, that's what every parent wants for their kids. But we've got a lot of work to do. When you think about it, and Jim, you referenced it, about half the kids in the United States today suffer from a mental health issue. And in fact, when we looked at the data for the city of Milwaukee, about 2/3 of the kids in the central city of Milwaukee are living today with unresolved significant mental health issues. And we know that the access to care, the resources are not out there to be available. At Children's Hospital Wisconsin, we have about 2 million touch points with kids a year. And we just looked at this last year, and we know that there's about 492 kids a day in our 40 locations who have some primary or secondary mental health issue. But the problem we know that occurs today is, what do you do? Well, there are some things you can do. There's solutions out there. One of the things that we understand is that you can diagnose depression in a child as early as 2 years of age. Now think about that. If we start to really work with kids, meet them where they are, and start to use the identifiers in a very meaningful way before they get to their teen years and they're in crisis, we will really definitely set kids up much better for success to be able to, again, go to school and learn and develop the resiliency. And as I said, there's solutions out there, because your mental health, while we talk a lot about healthcare in the healthcare community, you have to think about a comprehensive definition of health, and that's mental health, that's physical health, it's social health, it's dental health. It has to all be right for these kids to come together. And I will tell you, one of the biggest gaps is next to dental is mental health services. And I think it has a lot to do with the access and resources, early identification, but also, as Jim referenced, it's also about stigma. If your child has a heart problem or cancer or a neurosciences problem, you'll talk to your neighbors and friends, you'll let people know. If they have a mental health problem, think about how open you are, how willing you are to talk, because with all the stigma, the first thing people think is, oh, bad parent, you didn't do something right. Well, the fact of the matter isn't necessarily always bad parent. We know there's other reasons for kids and why they are suffering from mental health issues. So for me, the Kids in Crisis series has allowed us to have the right conversations, to come together, to talk about this in an open and meaningful way, but most importantly, to develop solutions where we can come together to make sure that we're valuing this in the same realm as we would with other diseases of people's states. So I'm really excited about today to see all the people in the room. I'm really excited about the conference. I think we're going to have some really good topics to share. And let's, as a community, use the resources. There's no lack of resources in this community. We've got the resources. It's really just wrapping ourselves around those families and around those kids to make sure things happen in a very meaningful way. So our vision at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin is we want the kids of Wisconsin to be the healthiest in the nation. And we do really take into consideration that's a broader definition than just physical care. So let's learn today, but let's really take action, come together, do the right things on behalf of our kids. And thank you for having me.
So Rory Lenane sent me an email saying, you guys interested in collaborating with us on an event? And I said, sure. And I went down to the newspaper and met with her and with David Haynes. The two of them are working these days on the new Ideas Lab section of the Sunday Journal Sentinel. And I said, well, we got, real interest in this. We've got some things we can bring to the table. We need a few things like a date, and we need a national type speaker. That always is something we really want to do, is have a keynoter who people say, yeah, I want to hear that person. So I said, why don't we brainstorm about who that might be? Rory, in short order, her first nominee was Melissa Holt of Boston University. This was like the easiest assembly of an event that I've ever been involved in. And I sent Melissa an email, said, could we talk you into coming to Milwaukee for an event? She responded in about 2 minutes and said, yes, she loved it. She said, I really like doing these things. So we are very honored to have here today Melissa Holt. She is an assistant professor in counseling and psychology at the Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. That's why I have some notes in front of me, at Boston University. She previously was a behavioral scientist in the Division of Violence Prevention at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She's done extensive research on these subjects, especially bullying and bulliers. And she is going to talk for roughly the next hour with Mike Goucher. I'm tempted to say it to an audience in Milwaukee, a man who needs no introduction, but I will introduce him. Mike is a distinguished fellow in law and public policy here after a long career in television. Do want to clarify, he gave up his Channel 12 Sunday morning politics show recently. Some people thought he retired. No, we've got him now 100%. And we're very pleased by that. So let me introduce Mike, and let me welcome and introduce Professor Melissa Holt of Boston University.
Thank you, Alan, for that kind introduction. Appreciate it. It's good to be with everyone today. We appreciate your attendance at this conference. As Alan mentioned, we're going to have an hour conversation with Dr. Holt, who we're so glad you were able to get out of Boston before the nor'easter came, and we're able to get to our beautiful weather, which is always like this in Milwaukee. But we're going to spend about an hour talking about a variety of subjects, about young folks and mental health issues, about bullying. But the way we're going to do that is we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to audience questions, because I'm sure you will have some questions for Dr. Holt based on our discussion and perhaps just based on some thoughts that you had coming to the conference today. So again, thanks for being with us, Dr. Holt. Great to have you here. And we've heard some description already about the magnitude of the challenges facing young folks today. This is your area of expertise. How would you describe the mental health concerns that we see in our world today for young folks?
Absolutely. Well, first, I just wanted to thank everyone for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. In terms of how I see mental health, I think it's very consistent with what others have noted. I think that it's something kids are struggling with and at higher rates than they used to be. And I think also, as was noted, there's not enough services for youth to access in terms of helping with those mental health concerns. I think we've seen increases in depression for adolescents, and anxiety, and suicidal ideation and attempts. So it's certainly a pressing problem that needs to be addressed.
Why do we think we're seeing more of it? Do we know?
That is a great question. It'd be great to have a firm answer to that. I don't think there's a definitive answer to why rates are increasing. I think that people have postulated a variety of reasons. Social media certainly gets implicated at times. There's some evidence suggesting there could be an association between the rise in access to smartphones and mental health concerns, but there's other research that doesn't show that type of an association. Some people have implicated increased homework in schools and stress around that. Again, that's a little bit mixed. So I think it's something that we're starting to see as a trend, and what we really need to do is figure out more precisely what is driving those trends and how we can effectively intervene for kids.
We refer to mental health concerns. Let's get into that a little bit. What are we talking about specifically?
Right, so mental health concerns can really range depending on how the study is considering them, depending on who's talking about it. So many adolescents have some symptoms of depression or anxiety, and that's normative. And then concerns can range from there in terms of severity. Where we really need to be intervening are kids who have more symptoms that are consistent with diagnostic criteria for depression and anxiety. At the same time, it would be great if we can be intervening early for kids who are reporting some symptoms. I think, I forget who had noted this, we know if we intervene early on, that's going to lead to different trajectories for kids. At least half of kids who have a mental health concern in adulthood will have evidenced that by the age of 14. So the earlier we can intervene, the better. I also wanted to just jump back and note something I meant to say earlier in terms of rates. The other piece to consider is, on the one hand, we see increases and across reporters, largely self-report. The one thing to also keep in mind is that it could be that kids are more willing to share what's going on, or that providers are better able to notice those symptoms. So that's another piece we need to keep in mind. It may be that it's a true increase, and it may be that it's an issue of better detection and better reporting. I would say either way, clearly it's a pressing issue that needs to be addressed.
Give us some examples of what leads to some of these mental health challenges that young people face. We've heard trauma. That's something that this community is very familiar with, the subject of trauma. Give us your take on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think trauma is one of the strongest sort of correlates or predictors of mental health concerns, but a range of things can contribute to mental health concerns for any individual. So there are genetic factors that can load on that. There's family, community factors, school factors, like was noted earlier. Certainly we know there's association between bullying and mental health concerns. And then particularly for identity-based forms of bullying and harassment, those lead to more striking effects for kids. But really we think about mental health from sort of a social ecological perspective, in that there's factors at every level, from the individual to the family to their peer groups to the school and broader communities, that can influence any individual's experience with mental health.
Bullying, we hear an awful lot about that, and in fact in the Kids in Crisis series, that was referred to as often leading to the mental health issues that these young folks faced. This is your area of expertise, so let's spend some time on that. First of all, bullying, how prevalent is it for younger people in America today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the statistic that's often put out there is about 30% of kids will experience bullying at least a moderate level of severity. It changes developmentally, so we know that bullying peaks in middle school and then declines more in high school. We also can think of bullying, just like mental health, as along a continuum. So probably everyone in the room could say, oh yeah, I've had some experience at some point with bullying. But the 30% we talk about are kids who are really experiencing it on a more regular basis. In terms of a question people ask is bullying increasing? Is it decreasing? What's going on? We've seen in the United States slight declines in bullying over time, and now I'm talking about school-based bullying, but not significant declines.
One point we do want to address is this notion of cyberbullying, because that seems to get a lot of attention in the media. We hear a lot about that. I think intuitively we might think that social media would lead, it would make it easier for people to bully. Is that the case? Do we have any evidence to support that?
Right. It's a complicated question, a great one that comes up a lot. So surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly to some of you, although cyberbullying is a new venue or a new mechanism for bullying, it actually still is less common than in-person bullying. So more kids will have experiences face-to-face in terms of bullying than in the cyber domain. So the ranges vary for cyberbullying, but you may be looking at about 10%. Again, as a researcher, it's always going to depend on how you ask the question, who you're asking the question to, and so forth. For cyberbullying, in terms of changes, there's also a perception that it's increasing. 2 studies came out recently, and one showed an increase in cyberbullying over the past handful of years, and the other showed a slight decrease. And I think that was in part due to how the question was asked. So I think the jury is out a little bit in terms of whether cyberbullying is going up or not.
When we talk about bullying, we talk about direct aggression and indirect aggression. Give us examples of what we mean by that.
So direct aggression would be things like, being physically aggressive towards someone. So almost when bullying research started, that was the stereotypical bully we would think about as the kid who is maybe going up and being physically aggressive toward a weaker child. So that's one example of physical aggression for direct aggression. For indirect aggression, we think about more the relational forms of aggression, so spreading rumors and things. And although for physical bullying, that's more common among boys as well as verbal bullying, for relational aggression, for the most part, again, all research is a little bit mixed, but relational aggression, girls are slightly more likely to be involved than boys are.
Does bullying happen more for younger kids, or is it something we see more of in high school or that age group?
So it definitely peaks in middle school, but the nature of bullying can change over time. So you may be more likely to see incidents of physical aggression or bullying among younger kids. And then by high school, it may be more that indirect relational form of bullying that occurs.
Where does bullying happen in a school? Where is it most likely to happen?
Good question. And we actually, that's a great question. When we do survey work with schools, we actually ask schools to include that if they're assessing what's going on, about where it's occurring, because it can vary. Most often it's where adults aren't. Right, that makes sense. In the bathrooms, in the hallways, if there's not monitoring on the playground, cafeteria, it could be. But it does vary by school. So if a school is thinking about assessing what's going on in their particular community, finding out where it occurs is useful, because even before you put in a larger prevention program, that's a really easy, straightforward first step. If you find out it's happening more in the cafeteria, you can increase adult monitoring there.
So who are the bullies and who are the victims of bullying? What do we know about that?
Yeah, so one thing to note is we do, as researchers and as just people out in the world, have those categories of sort of bully and victim. And on the one hand, that is true. There are kids who are engaging at higher levels or being targeted at higher levels. There's also some fluidity in those roles. So just to have the sense that if a child is engaging in a lot of bullying behavior, that doesn't mean that the following year they would be. In terms of who those people are, that's also a complicated question. So we know what is correlated with being targeted and perpetrating, but that doesn't mean it will occur for every kid. So for kids who are targeted more often, they may be likely to be slightly more anxious or be different in some way. Certainly we know that sexual minority youth, gender minority youth experience more victimization. Kids with disabilities also experience more victimization. For kids who bully, again, there are kids who are more proactive in their aggression and kids who are more reactive, so that can vary a bit. Often, for some kids, they may have had experiences of being exposed to aggression, and it's sort of a modeling behavior. Other kids may be using it as a form of dominance. So it's a complex picture, I would say. And again, here we think about that social ecological model where anyone's propensity is really informed by multiple levels of that social ecology. If that makes any sense. It's complicated.
Yeah. Are there things that you look for in the childhood of a bully or in a family setting that you see again and again when you study this? Are there certain determinant factors, I guess, that lead a young person to be a bully?
It's a good question. I don't think we could say definitively there's something that's going to lead someone to be a bully. So a lot of my work also focuses on how family in particular, like you mentioned, might influence bullying involvement. But that's a complicated picture. So we know that kids who are involved in bullying as a target, as a perpetrator, and that group of what we hear as bully victims, the kids who are targeted and are aggressive, they are more likely to have experienced other forms of victimization in the home and the community. But that actually exists for all of those groups, right? So a target may experience more, as would a perpetrator and a bully victim. Does that mean that every bully has had an experience of trauma or victimization in their history? No, but there is an increased likelihood.
So in some respects, both the bullies and the bully victims, there are shared experiences that they may have had in their lives to that point.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's something that's always really important to keep in mind in terms of providers, which I think is occurring more frequently. But kids who are aggressive in school, I think there historically was a perception that the main issue to address was the aggression. But these are kids often who may have trauma histories. They also may be experiencing internalizing symptoms. Just like targets, they're more likely to think about and attempt suicide. Yeah, it's a complicated picture.
Well, let's get into, I think something everybody in this room is interested in is how do we intervene? How do we address this if we see this or this comes to our attention? Let me begin by asking, what are the hallmarks of a successful intervention program? Because some programs, frankly, are not terribly successful. What does a successful program need?
Generally, when we think about programs collectively, which are successful, we think about comprehensive programs. So these are not one-time assemblies. They're programs that are infused in the school culture that have buy-in from all stakeholders. So they're programs that are going to include families, the youth, the teachers, school staff, from someone who's driving the bus to someone who's working in the cafeteria. They occur over time and really try to change the school climate to make it a climate that is not respectful of bullying. I think the challenge with comprehensive evidence-based programs is that they are comprehensive and take a lot of time, which sometimes can be difficult for schools. And the programs we know that tend to be a bit more successful are also more expensive, which can be challenging for schools. Some of the work we've been doing recently in our lab, my co-lab lead, Jen Green, have been looking at shorter interventions to look at their efficacy. Again, with schools juggling so much, it would be great if we could have some evidence for something that doesn't need to be quite as comprehensive, that can move the needle. And one of the programs we're looking at recently did seem to show some positive effects for kids that didn't have that level of comprehensive buy-in. I mean, generally, do we want everyone to buy in? Absolutely, but I think we also need to recognize that some schools may not have the capacity for a range of reasons to be able to implement such a program.
You, I believe, have said that zero tolerance programs at school have not been effective. Why not?
Because in terms of intervention, we don't want to think necessarily of punishment. We want to think of growth opportunities and modeling pro-social behaviors. So we want to, if you think about particularly about young kids who may be engaging in some of these behaviors, a punishment isn't going to be as useful to them as saying, okay, let's think about what happened here. How could we think about engaging more pro-socially the next time? So overall, you're right, zero tolerance programs aren't effective. It's really changing the norm, changing the culture, giving kids opportunities to learn appropriate behaviors.
What gets in the way of a program being effective? Is it follow through? Is it, what are the things that can take a well-intentioned effort at dealing with bullying within a school, but somehow it just doesn't really have results?
So one thing we know from evaluations of evidence-based programs is that fidelity to the program matters. So I know I've worked with districts that maybe have selected a great program, but for whatever reason, again, not blaming the school, there are real life reasons that programs can't be implemented with fidelity, then we find that they're less effective. I also think you really do need buy-in. If a program is coming from a school district, but there's not buy-in for a particular school community, it's not going to be as effective either.
Does bullying, do you see, Dr. Holt, bullying becoming a larger issue? Or you said, I think, that you've actually seen it go down a little bit. What do we think is happening there?
Well, I do think that, so the late 90s was, I think, when the United States really started addressing bullying, and I think there has been significant movement in terms of prevention programs, having language around bullying. I think fewer and fewer people say that it's just kids being kids, so I think in terms of why it could be going down, I think there's certainly more attention to it. Unfortunately, the amount it's going down is not a significant amount. It's going down marginally, so I think more still needs to be done. But there's certainly, I think, prior to times like Columbine, which is when we think about the U.S. Shifting towards addressing it, I think there really was a conception of this is something you just need to go through, it's part of life, it's not something that needs to be addressed. And certainly I can't think of any school that I've worked with that would be saying that now.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. If you're a caregiver in general, and you think bullying is happening in your school, for example, what should you do? What should caregivers do?
If you think it's occurring for your child or in the school?
Yeah.
I think that caregivers could become familiar with the school policy on bullying. So right now, all states have policies regarding bullying. So having a sense of what that policy is and what programming might be associated with it. So not all states mandate programming, but some do. And I think then having conversations with staff at school about what's going on and seeing what they're doing to sort of change those behaviors. But I think being a proactive caregiver makes a lot of sense. I think also in your own child, if you're a caregiver, noticing symptoms of either potentially your child being aggressive or being targeted, so kids saying they don't want to go to school, having ripped clothes, having worse grades, those sorts of things can be indicators of something going on for your own child.
So there are indicators, there are tip-offs that you can see very definitely.
There often are. I mean, not in every case, but often you can see signs that something's going on.
Does it make any difference? A lot of states, I think about half the states in the country, have laws that deal with bullying. Does that make a difference?
Absolutely. So right now, all states have legislation to address bullying, and then a handful, like you were saying, will have bullying prevention programs. I certainly think it does make a difference, and I think it's part of why we can see the decline in terms of at the state level, at least lawmakers saying this is important, which is infused down to the schools that they need to address it. I think sometimes the challenge is states will have legislation about bullying and be mandating bullying prevention programs, but then there is not necessarily enough capacity building for schools to be able to identify the programs and implement the programs and fund the programs.
Yeah, and that takes us into an interesting part of the discussion, and that is both access, but also whether or not these programs are funded adequately. What's been your experience? How well are we doing in terms of funding the kinds of programs that are necessary to deal with some of the mental health concerns we're talking about?
I mean, often it has to be a school funding the program, so that's just costly. So I've worked in evaluations of programs like Second Step, which have shown to be effective, but they're not inexpensive programs. And if the school doesn't have the resources, it's a challenge. So I think that would be one piece if schools were being given access to more funds to implement these kind of programs, which in turn, linking back to mental health, if we know that bullying is linked to mental health, these programs would also be optimally reducing mental health concerns, at least for some of these kids, if bullying was being addressed.
In Wisconsin, those of you in the room, some of you obviously are familiar with this, that the last governor, Governor Walker, put some money in the budget for dealing with youth mental health issues. Governor Evers has proposed a significant increase in that. In his 2-year budget, I think a $22 million increase each year in his budget to address that. Money that could be used to hire social workers or counselors or school psychologists. Is that on the right track?
Absolutely. So we know that the American Council Association recommends 1 counselor for every 250 youth, and it's closer to 1 in 500 in reality. And I think Wisconsin falls around 1 in 450, 460, something like that. So I think, and similarly, there's rates suggested for school psychologists that aren't really being met nationally. So I think having more providers in the school would be an excellent use of funds.
I want to ask you about a challenge for teachers in the classroom. In addressing and recognizing youth mental health concerns. Are we asking an awful lot of our teachers who are trying to educate children, each of whom has his or her own set of issues or challenges, are we asking them to do an awful lot?
On the one hand, I can appreciate that certainly the goal of schools primarily is to educate youth. On the other hand, I think schools and teachers are this really unique setting that can serve as a place of early identification, referral to treatment. I think the challenge is, what we know when we ask teachers is that they don't feel like they're equipped to do that. They feel like they're being asked to educate kids, to notice mental health concerns, and they're not quite sure how to navigate that. And in terms of teacher preparation programs, the research also shows that if you look at curricula, they're also not really getting exposure in their training to recognize those signs. Jen Green, who again co-leads lab with me, I'm working on her in a project she's leading to help teachers who are in teacher preparation programs learn the signs so that they can serve again, not to give them a new role as counseling kids, but really to be able to say, okay, I see this going on for the student, maybe I need to refer them out to the counselor. Because schools represent a place that in the US, all children go. So that's a place that can even reduce disparities in linking kids to access, which is really critical. So on the one hand, yes, it's asking teachers perhaps to do something they weren't asked to do 30 years ago. On the other hand, I think it's a great way to identify mental health concerns and connect kids to resources that are needed.
Let's talk about the subject of access. That's a big challenge right now.
Yeah.
What needs to be done in terms of making, if you think something's happening, or if you see a change in your child, or if you see a change in your student, and you think something needs to be done, how do we go about that, given some of the limitations we've been talking about?
I mean, certainly if you're a caregiver noticing those challenges, trying to connect your child to resources is a great step. I think the challenge, as you noted, is that not just in schools, but in the community, there are not enough care providers for youth in terms of psychologists and psychiatrists. And there's disparities beyond that in terms of access, in terms of racial ethnic minority youth are less likely to receive services. We also know that kids in rural communities, I think was noted as well before, are less likely to have providers. So I think on the one hand, really being an advocate for your child to get those services, with the recognition that I think both at the school level and the community level, there need to be more resources for kids.
Is it a real problem that do we have enough, for example, people who are being trained as school psychologists? That's a big issue. Do we have people in the pipeline to fill those roles?
Right. I mean, that could be a great place to focus in terms of training more people to fill those roles. There's also been an emphasis on, can we connect community-based mental health with schools? So some models do that. In Boston, for example, some schools, the providers are individuals from community agencies. That's another creative way to sort of improve access and opportunities for kids to receive treatment.
Give me a sense of resources for people, whether they be in this room or whether they be parents. Where can they turn if they want to find out more about all of these subjects? Are there websites, are there books that they can look at and take away valuable information?
Yeah, so in terms of bullying, we often recommend stopbullying.gov, which is the government, it combines a bunch of governmental agencies, but it has resources for parents, for educators, for students, to sort of figure out what to do in terms of navigating that. In terms of resources for mental health, I think that's a little bit more probably state and community specific. I think often pediatricians, if a family is not aware of particular resources, could connect you to lists or availability. Some pediatricians' offices also do have clinical staff that children can see as well.
I also want to mention you and one of your colleagues, co-editor of a book. Tell us a little bit about that book, because I think it would be very helpful to folks who might be interested.
So it's a book focused on evidence-based sort of school mental health interventions, and I collaborated with Amy Grills on this. And we noticed that there wasn't really a book that combined a lot of information for school providers and thought about school mental health. So there's different chapters in it one set focuses on different common presenting disorders, so anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and so forth. Then there's also consideration to particular subgroups. So there's a chapter on GLBTQ youth and supports in that way. There's also sections on families and then on prevention more broadly. And each chapter, many of the chapters have a case study and also information about treatment. So for example, the chapter on anxiety talks about, as a school, are there programs you can be putting in place, like Friends is an example of a program that schools could use. So it's a nice resource in terms of giving you a snapshot of what's going on for a particular issue and then linking you to some resources for that particular issue as well.
And the name of the book is?
I should remember that. I've forgotten the name of my own book. I have it in my bag. I'd be happy to share it later.
We'll do it. We're kind of come back actually at the end of this
Yes,
program, and we'll give it back. But
Yeah.
we'll give them the information then. But no, that's because I think people are hungry for the trying to find out how do we address this right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think often it's a question of, I think like you noted, where are the resources? Okay, I know it's a problem, but what can I do? And I think that was part of the motivation of this book. Again, it's not just presenting the information, but it's saying, where can I go from here to find out more information?
Bottom line for us in this conversation, Dr. Holt, so we see mental health issues perhaps more than ever before. Is that true?
For adolescents, yes.
Yes. And is it something that we can say at some point that we begin to get a handle on this, or is this just part of our rapidly changing, rapidly evolving culture?
I would like to think we can get a handle on it. I think here today is an example of people from all sorts of, we have journalists, and we have the Children's Hospital, and we have a law school, and the School of Education, and youth, and providers. I think that's an example of saying if we can mobilize together, I think this can be addressed. I think it's an issue of making sure people realize it's a problem, and that we need to think of ways to intervene and prevent kids from experiencing these concerns.
One of the things I wanted to do here is take some questions, and I'm actually going to do this a little sooner than I originally planned, because I want to get some of your thoughts about this. If you have questions for Dr. Holt, what we normally do at these events is if you're seated in the seating bowl, you can reach down. You see that little black kind of triangular shaped device. Put your finger down on that. We'll be able to hear your question. Everybody in the room can hear it then. And if you're in the back, we will take a microphone to you. Ryan is the gentleman with the microphone over there. He will come. You can ask your question, and we'll take as many as we can for the next 20 minutes or so. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand, and we'll begin there. Yes, please.
My question is, what can a parent do where a school leader is not responding or says it's a conflict, it's not bullying?
Everybody hear the question? Okay. Yes, no? Yes, okay.
So, and just in case I heard some no's, what should a parent do if a school is not responding and saying an incident is, for example, conflict versus bullying? I think that's a challenge that we hear a number of times. I think continuing to press the school in addressing it, finding out what their policy is around bullying, so you know sort of what your students' rights are within that district. And I think, if, for example, a principal is not responding, perhaps going to the district, perhaps connecting with a school counselor in the school, finding people who could help you advocate for your child.
Okay, this is two parts. This is actually two parts.
Okay.
Once that has already occurred, I'm going off of email I received. So
Okay.
this is an actual situation that's occurring. So once it's made that this complaint has been generated, what's happening is the school leader has been shaming the parents. They're realigning IEP services. They're picking classroom favoritism, and they're encouraging the victim to transfer schools, calling families liars, backdate documents, failing students, and even were told that they were going to call DCFS on families if they continue to drag this out.
So that certainly sounds like a challenging and stressful and unfortunate situation. It's always hard to speak to particular cases that are going on. Again, I think that trying to find allies in that school district, that school community that can help families, or potentially outside the district to advocate for that child. You certainly don't want the child to be adversely affected first if they're experiencing bullying, and then it sounds like losing needed services or classroom experiences. So again, I apologize to not have specific feedback, but really trying to find more people to help work with the family to advocate for the child, whether that's someone within the school district outside that school, or potentially someone outside the school that can help advocate.
Yeah, because one kid has already committed suicide. So that because of the intense bullying. So But thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, just keep your finger down on it. We'll get it.
Oh, where it says push. Got it. Thank you. So in some of the your research, you didn't mention, but people are always saying it, that there's, across the nation, a lack of funding in physical education and also the arts. So when there are budget cuts, those are the two things that get, cut down. What do you think about that as it regards to child development, bullying, feeling self-esteem, and things of that nature?
I think that's a great question in terms of cuts to programs for physical education and the arts. I can't think of any research that speaks to it directly, although I can say if we think about mental health, we know one of the best things to support mental health is physical activity. So that certainly works against mental health. My sense is states there's been this big cut, and then I think some states or districts are trying to push back against that. But I do think having access to physical education can be very helpful in terms of mental health. I think in terms of arts, it gives kids another way of expression, something maybe that they can connect with and feel good about. I think you mentioned self-esteem. So I think those programs are really important. My sense is schools are under a lot of pressure to sort of show strong academic performance, and unfortunately that seems to come at this cost, whereas we know that kids in fact probably will perform better if they're having that time to go outside, they're having that time to be in a PE class, they're having time to engage in an arts program. So again, I don't have specific research other than knowing that physical activity improves mental health to back that up, but I do think that those are really critical pieces for kids.
Other questions? We'll go there and then we'll go there. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. So I'm curious about the relationship, or if there is one, between like a more character-based program versus a specifically anti-bullying program. Because it sounds like a lot of the things that we're talking about are not just like mental health issues, but also like maybe they can be addressed by talking about character and culture. And so I wonder if you've done any research or seen any results in schools that have decreased bullying by using a character education program.
That's a great question, and it reminds me, so I think a lot of what we also know is that social emotional development programs more broadly are ones that can be helpful. So they address things like bullying, but they have that broader sense to them. I think also in terms of something relating to character is we know that particularly for adolescents, kids programs that encourage kids to sort of stand up and be good active bystanders and supporting their peers, those are actually particularly effective programs. I also think the question you raised is a good one in terms of there's all these things schools are being asked to address, and what kind of programs maybe can address a broader range of issues, whether that's supporting character or focused on mental health or social emotional development. But with all these pieces occurring for kids, can we streamline the process to support kids' well-being better? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. So is there so we often hear about like the summer learning loss achievement gap, right? Is there any evidence that suggests what happens when these resources are gone for the 12 weeks of summer break? Are students regressing with their mental health when they come back in the fall? And if so, what are maybe some thoughts on some solutions that the community can do during those 3 months of summer when those resources are cut off, when the schools may be closed?
That is a great question. Actually, a graduate student in our lab, Rachel Oblath, is working on that very issue in terms of summer mental health. I think mental health concerns can become more prominent in the summer for the reasons you noted. If the primary point of service for kids is the school and the school is not there, how can you address that gap? Interestingly, I was reviewing some articles the other night, and for suicide specifically, there was a trend paper looking at ER and inpatient admissions, and for that specifically, only rates were higher during the academic year versus the summer months. However, certainly for mental health broadly, I would agree with you, there's a gap in coverage for kids, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yes, tonight.
You've mentioned several times disparities in terms of access to mental health services, and my question is particularly around untreated trauma in neighborhoods in cities. I know there's a different issue in terms of access in rural communities. My question is, what is the conversation and what are the actions being taken to address the disparities with respect to access, particularly for untreated trauma among our kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely disparities when we think about trauma without treatment and addressing that can really carry throughout a child's lifetime. I think part of it is, I think part of the disparities are from the lack of resources. I think part of it can be around stigma for mental health treatment. So thinking about ways to destigmatize the treatment around that. Having more providers who can inform treatment in a trauma-sensitive way. I know in looking at the approach Wisconsin takes in schools at least, I was pleased to see that part of what they think about is trauma-informed care, because I think that's critical, as well as providers more generally having that lens to understand kids better with a trauma background. But it's certainly the case that kids with trauma histories experience more mental health concerns. And notably, again, intervening early is going to lead to more positive outcomes for those kids.
Just do a follow-up.
Sure.
I'm asking, do you see a trend toward increasing access to resources to do exactly what you're talking about? Or do you see a sort of, what I would perceive oh, that's too bad, and nothing happening, at least on a national scene, based on your experiences?
That's a great question. I don't know, since overall we know there's not an increase in resources, I wouldn't say there's necessarily an increase in resources per se, but I would say there's an increase in resources that have a trauma-informed lens. So I think that's the big change I would see. So more and more you think about schools who are providers saying, we want to have a trauma-informed or a trauma-sensitive approach. So I think that has increased, even if resources as a whole for kids have not.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yes, and then we'll go back up here.
Have schools tried forming peer groups in schools to handle bullying, and are those effective? Kids might be more free talking to the other kids than counselors.
Mm-hmm. In terms of peer-based interventions to reduce that? That's a great question. So we know that peer groups really matter a lot when it comes to aggression. So kids who are in groups that engage in more bullying, those kids will become more likely to engage in those behaviors over time. We also know that generally peer influence matters. So I think to your point, one of the projects I'm working on now is a peer leader program. It's specifically focused on identity-based harassment. But I think that hearing messages from peers, as you said, particularly in adolescence, could be much more powerful in changing behaviors than potentially hearing it from adults. So I think that's a great point.
Mm-hmm. I go back. Did you have a question? Yes.
I'm just wondering, how does untreated trauma or mental health concerns impact in adults, specifically school staff, impact the identification or interventions for young people?
So in other words, untreated trauma in providers in the school setting?
Right.
I'm trying to think if I can speak of any research to support an answer for that. I think that, some of our work has tried to look at our not trauma specifically, but our teachers with, current or history of mental health concerns more or less likely to note trauma or to note mental health concerns. I think there'd be some support to say if you've experienced something yourself, whether it's trauma-related or mental health, you might be more likely to pick up on that in kids. But I don't think I have a definitive answer from the research. But that's part of what we've suspected, that you may be more sensitive to those cues potentially.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, just a quick question. For educators and being in a school setting, family is really important to students, and having that partnership with families and working with families, not just in mental health, but just in other areas around the student development. What ways, or have you seen any good models of increasing like that partnership versus just family involvement versus just I come for 15 minutes twice a year, a good partnership for families and schools that really help to address mental health issues, educational issues, those types of things, because I believe that giving families and students a voice will also help us to kind of start to engage in some problem solving, coming up with some solutions to dealing with some of the issues that families are facing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a specific model in terms of partnership, but I can think of a variety of different components that are useful. I think including parents, as you said, and caregivers as part of this collaborative process and make them feel like they're part of this collaborative group can be really helpful. I think having opportunities for families to come in that are accessible to families is really important. So even when you think about parent-teacher conferences that most often might be during the day are not the best time to get families in. I've seen models of schools. I think this was actually a model in Chicago where not just a time to bring families in when something was going wrong or there was the parent-teacher conference, but having a board game night for families to come in. I think also if families feel more connected to the community and more a sense of an ownership of that improves the school climate overall. So I think those multiple touch points and really letting families know that they're important in terms of the school's role as well.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'm interested in, excuse me, we focus a lot on the victims of bullying, and it seems to be sort of a Band-Aid situation where we're treating child by child when sometimes there's a central bully that kind of continues to bully. So children will leave school, and then the bully remains at the school and bullies other children. And how, thinking about the experiences of children who bully and their potentially trauma-related histories. Mm-hmm. Do you know, are there links within sort of a trauma history to bullying, to school expulsion, to school to prison pipeline in terms of outcomes for bullies that we need to be thinking about?
It's a good question. There's not a lot of longitudinal research either for those targeted or perpetrator. There's a little bit of research out of Norway that suggested that kids who were at higher levels of bullying sort of had an increased rate of criminal involvement in adulthood, but I don't think there's a ton of research out there. I think the pathway you note, though, makes a lot of sense. If you have a kid with a trauma history who's then engaged in bullying, we want to be able to then help that kid before they get to the point of expulsion, because then we know once kids start getting expelled from school, that's linked to less likelihood of graduation and challenges and outcomes. So I think that the question is, how can we intervene early and in a sensitive way so that that potential pathway doesn't play itself out?
Mm-hmm. Yes?
I found the right button. Thank you. The challenge is so comprehensive and so complex. As I listen to you, I sense it's a birth to death issue. It's a cultural issue. Mm-hmm. We invest a great deal of money in healthcare, education, social service education in the state of Wisconsin and across the nation. Mm-hmm. We often wonder, do we prepare the nurses, the teachers, the social workers for this complex world? Then we end up preparing them in silos. Mm-hmm. And then we send them out in the world, supposedly to work together. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what you think we should be doing with our resources and personal preparation across the healthcare, social service, and education fields to address this problem.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question in terms of the silos, and I think it just initially brought to mind this idea of today as an example of bringing these silos together in a way they may not traditionally. I think it's, I think that in terms of at the preparation level, it's making individuals preparing each of those tracks aware of the other pieces. So I think, for example, again, with teachers, having some sense in their training of mental health concerns. And so an example of a training we've been using with pre-service teachers is through Cognito, and it's a pretty brief educational experience, I would say, for teachers that does potentially increase their ability to notice mental health concerns among kids. I think then once you get into a school setting, having team efforts where everyone's coming together to have these conversations eliminate some of those silos. So having teachers there with social workers in the school, with counselors, with whomever is involved in this, to really address the issues holistically. I agree. And some schools think about more wraparound models. If you think at the very comprehensive level, there are schools that have mental health care, dental health care, everything within one school's community, and we know that can really support kids in terms of them not having to have these multiple points of contact. So I think aspirationally, it makes a lot of sense to break down the silos, and I think it's a complicated question in terms of how to best get there.
I'd just add that about 50 years ago, a colleague of mine, a former student who went on to teach at Simmons in early childhood education, did a class study, and she went and interviewed ministers and physicians about their orientation to developmental disabilities or special ed needs. She found that they, across the board, had less than 1 hour of orientation in their training towards these things. My guess is that if we were to examine 50 years later this related to healthcare or trauma, we'd find the same thing across almost all these fields.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And I think, just one quickly in terms of breaking down silos, and I think of Children's Hospital as an example here. I mean, I think about thinking creatively about what other providers can catch kids. So, I don't think 10 years ago, pediatricians would, maybe I'm getting the dates exactly right, but wouldn't necessarily ask about bullying, but now it's a very common screening in a pediatrician's office. That's another way to have people be working more collaboratively to help kids. And who's that?
Right there.
Brian.
A lot of the conversation is about interventions and treatment things we can do and prevention programs maybe. But if you talk to kids, I think they say a lot of the anxiety and stress comes from school itself. Mm-hmm. Do you think we should be thinking about redesigning the way we educate kids and the way we structure the school day and the ambitions we lay out for young people that we have in our society?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And I should also note that's Ryan Koenig, who does amazing work in Dane County on addressing these issues and surveying kids. I think schools have been implicated in part, like we've talked about, in terms of the stress. I think in terms of the components, I think it's complicated. Again, some research shows that increased homework and expectations is leading to some of that, and other research says the converse. Getting back to the question earlier about PE and arts, I think in getting rid of some of those elements is probably not great for students' stress. Students need to have an experience at school where they're doing something other than sitting in a chair and listening to a teacher. So I agree we could think about restructuring schools in a way that's more conducive to overall well-being. And I think some of the changes recently, again, have not been doing that. Even in terms of think about reduced lunchtime for kids. They're asked to sit down, eat really quickly. Some schools say you can't talk at lunch, you have 10 minutes. That would feel very stressful to me. I can't imagine a kid, you're sitting in the classroom all day, you have 10 minutes to eat. So I agree, thinking about these broader redesign issues could be one factor in promoting well-being.
That's another conference. we could just do another conference on that. That'd be a great conference. We'll go there and then we'll get a couple more, yes.
First of all, thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedule to come here. This is a very real topic for all of us. My question is the family, the divorce rate, the single parents, the blended families. All this seems to take a toll on these adolescents who already have a handful. Is there stats to prove that this is part of the problem? For the kids as well as for the families, for the parents to deal with this kind of stuff.
In terms of, do we find that family structure is related to mental health concerns?
Right, absolutely. That the family is different now. More kids are involved, stepkids, the attention isn't there. You got two parents that live in different locations that maybe parent differently. Perhaps a child wants to know why their parents aren't together. Was it their fault? So many factors involved, and I've always had a strong belief that the family was the key to helping the situation. But are there stats to prove that also?
Yeah. In terms of the various constellations of families and how that might influence mental health, I don't think, I can't speak to a specific study that might address some of that. I think in general what we think about is families under stress, then kids might be under more stress, but I think that could come in a variety of ways. I can imagine families who may be divorcing, which has some level of stress, but the way the families are handling it and the experience of it is very different for a kid than in another family where that's occurring. I think the point you also raised initially, though, was in terms of connecting kids to resources. Certainly, as parents are more stressed, more strapped if they're a single parent, I think it's harder to connect a kid to resources. I think in general, being able to get a range of services for your kids is taxing for anyone, and I think if you're a sole parent doing that, that would be more taxing, certainly. Yeah.
Did you have a question? Yes.
I guess it's more of a statement. Someone was talking about redesigning schools, and in our community-based therapeutic arts program, we're reframing our discussion from trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed practices to healing-centered engagement. And it may seem like it's just semantics, but it's a much more hopeful way of looking at it. And so we talk about, culturally responsive practices, our cooperative environment, relationship building, circle work. We need to skew hopeful.
Absolutely.
And by saying healing, there's the sense that, yes, this can be healed. If it's pure trauma is the first thing you hear, it just backs people off, I think.
Stuck there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Let me go up there, and then we'll come down this way. Yes.
I'm curious if you had any experience or if you looked into equine-assisted learning and therapy or dogs in the schools. We're hearing a lot more of how the use of animals is an effective way to reduce stress and anxiety in children as opposed to the traditional counseling method.
I think that's a great question. I think in general, in terms of stress reduction, certainly sometimes, and in some circumstances when traumatic events occur, having animals present is very helpful for individuals. In terms of as a therapeutic approach specifically, I think there's less evidence supporting that. But again, I think those are distinctions between a therapeutic approach and generally reducing stress or being helpful for some kids, which I think absolutely could be the case.
I'm going to make my way down this way. There were a couple there, right there, and then we'll come down here.
What language do you use to combat people who say our kids are just more sensitive?
Great question. And I think...
Do you hear that a lot? That we just, oh, this is just a very sensitive thing. We've always had these issues.
Yeah.
These kids are just more sensitive.
I think I hear it less than I used to, but I think it still does occur. I think it's just really highlighting for people that, no, that's not the case, that these kids are really struggling. And I think that as whomever, as adults, we know that kids are going to be most likely to be successful in having positive well-being if they have people who support them. So by telling a kid you're just being sensitive, that's sort of standing in the way of them being effectively treated or experiencing that someone believes in them and knows that they can be helped. So I think that, for bullying, kids feel a lot worse if teachers say, it's not a big deal, don't worry about it. And similarly for mental health, if you're saying you're just being sensitive, that's not really helpful, and that's going to lead a kid to have a trajectory of more concerns. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then we'll come one more, and then down here.
So as a past educator myself and now a mental health professional, I experienced burnout myself. And I'm just wondering what interventions you've seen or research that points towards treating mental health in the teachers, the providers, and the parents, because that would certainly impact our kids.
Absolutely. I don't think there's one intervention approach specifically, but I fully agree with you. I know as someone who trains, those that will become psychologists or licensed mental health professionals, I think it's so critical for people in those fields to be able to have their own therapy to generally support them. I think that in specific circumstances when there may be an incident, for example, there was a completed suicide at a school, it's really important to have supports in there for all teachers and staff and everyone involved, because that's really challenging as a teacher to sort of be managing the classroom, managing what's going on, and managing what's going on internally. So I agree, it's often not thought about as much that teachers and mental health professionals also need those kind of supports. So,
yes.
For yourself or collaborators you've worked with, any research that looks at online schooling? Because the fact of the matter is families and students are really voting with their feet. I mean, they're going to online schools, and it can be due to harassment, mental health issues, and whatnot. And I think the irony is these are the students that need more helpful, nurturing arms around them and just flat out good schools versus trying to go it alone and segregate themselves even more. So any experience with that?
I unfortunately don't know of any research that would address that, but that it is an interesting question. Is that sort of serving kids well, or is it producing more challenges? It's an interesting question.
I'm going to take maybe one more question. Anybody has a question? I see somebody back there with a hand up. Ryan's going, wow, I got to go all the way back there.
I could use my middle school teacher.
Oh, that's perfect.
Hi, thank you. Just actually 2 quick comments. This structure question, I know we like to walk away from it, but kids do best in community, and our teachers have the most time to create community. And so the structure problem is all of our student services folks have time to come to training. It takes money to get teachers to training. And I think we really have to look at that. It's kind of like we need to go upstream and be willing to go upstream to think about our teachers and where our kids spend the most time.
Absolutely.
And then just a quick answer to educator professional burnout. The Department of Public Instruction has been involved in developing the Compassion Resilience Toolkit, and there's going to be 2 trainings in Milwaukee for teams from health and human service organizations and schools to be able to implement that, addressing not just what do I do as an individual, but how do we create a culture for our staff where we can be well while we serve kids that are challenged.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap things up there, and we'll bring up our next panel. But before I go, I often ask guests who are at the law school a very basic question, and I thought it might be a good way to end our discussion today. Why this for you? Why this line of work? Why this exploration of the issue of bullying? What called to you about this subject?
That is a great question. I'd have such a long answer, so let me try to do it succinctly.
You've got like 2 minutes, so
yeah. Can't tell my life story. I think really it originated out of work with kids. As an undergrad, I was volunteering at a program at a Boston City hospital that served young children with trauma histories, that also served their families, and this idea of really thinking about kids and trauma they experience and supporting them really resonated with me. And then as I moved forward, and I still maintain that clinical interest in terms of my practice, I became interested in, when I was in graduate school was when bullying was sort of being talked about more, and I started thinking about it in concert with these other forms of trauma exposures. And just hearing kids' stories and what was going on for them and how they're at school so much of their week and experiencing these, behaviors that are really damaging to them. And then for some of the kids having trauma outside of that and thinking this is something that we really need to address. And I think schools could be a great place to support kids. And so it's just remained for 20-something years a passion of mine, but really, again, coming from kids and youth and their stories.
And my sense is you're hopeful. You're hopeful that we can, even though we see numbers increasing,
absolutely,
you're hopeful we can get a handle on it.
Absolutely. And I think, again, seeing so many people from different arenas here today speaks to that.
All right. Dr. Melissa Holt, thank you very, very much.
So much.
Appreciate
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And now we're going to continue, so don't leave your chairs, don't run for coffee, stay right with us. Rory Linane, who is the public health reporter for the Ideas Lab section of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, who's done some great work on this Kids in Crisis series that we've seen in USA Today network newspapers all around the state of Wisconsin, is going to moderate our next panel. And I'm going to turn it over to Rory. Thanks, Rory.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm so excited to be part of this conference today, and it's great to see how many people came out and all of your great questions. That was awesome. So I've been working on our Kids in Crisis series since it started over 3 years ago now. And we started out by looking at the problem of teen suicide in Wisconsin. And as we started digging into that, it quickly became clear that there's really a wide range of mental health challenges that are rising for students in our state, and some really severe barriers to access to when kids are actually trying to get mental health care. So since then, we've tried to take a really solutions-oriented approach to this, and we've looked all over the country at what has actually worked to get kids better access to care. And throughout all of that, we've known that it's really important to keep at the center of that the voices of young people who've actually experienced mental health challenges. So that's why today the first of our 3 panels will all be young people who have lived experience and are willing to talk about some of their stories. And I will try to save some time at the end for questions from all of you too. And then I just wanted to plug a few things before, as they get their mics on over there. We are, as Jim mentioned, we're working on a documentary right now with Milwaukee PBS about youth mental health. It's called You're Not Alone, and that will be airing May 16th on PBS, and after that we will be setting up community screenings of the documentary. So if anyone is interested in hosting a screening, please find me after and get in touch about that. And I also want to plug our podcast called This Is Normal. Again, that's This Is Normal, and that includes each episode talks with different young people about some of their own personal experiences. And actually, one of the episodes is about one of the students we have here tonight, Jessie Pennington Cross. So I will now introduce all of them. We have Jessie Pennington Cross, who is a student at Glen Hills Middle School. And we have Alex Schmidt, who is a student here at Marquette University, and she's part of an organization here called Active Minds, which works to raise awareness about mental health challenges. And we have Amai Collins, who is a junior at Rufus King International High School in Milwaukee. And finally, we have Parker Adams, who is pursuing her master's in counseling psychology at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So let's give them a warm welcome for being here. So first, before we get into questions, I met Parker because I was at a poetry reading and I heard her read some poems about mental health that were really spectacular, and I asked her to share one here today. So to start things off, we're going to have her share a poem.
Thank you. Oh, and the mic's on. It's funny talking backstage versus up here. So I copied it down on paper. I want to thank you all for coming and for taking the time and space to listen to us. I think some of what we've heard already today speaks to how isolating it can feel when you're experiencing something that's weighing on you and you feel like you can't quite speak about it. So this is a poem called Sometimes We Are a Song of Breaking. Through the window, orange embraces rose in the sky. From bed, I weep for moments of magic, such still truth. Rumination is a poor friend when there's a scream, always clawing at the backs of my teeth for release. I am practicing new language for my pain. It has not resulted in more followers on Instagram. I have been punished for being present in my body, this aching, feeling thing, and sometimes it is too sad to share, or I am deep into the fear that tomorrow will be no better than ailing yesterday. My skin bubbles against the wind, chilled or afraid, alive. Orange pulp builds up in my throat heavy, mitosis blockage like a pipe underneath the sink. I should call someone for help, the plumber or the expert on oranges. If I can explain what I feel, do I still feel it? Will it go away? Sometimes I do not speak. My throat speaks to me. My throat says, I am narrow and tasked with too much. My throat says, help. The voice box is heavy. It is security officer's booth at the entrance to the park. My secrets stop to check in and do not leave, piling on top of one another, sticky rice, Jenga blocks. I am learning new ways to phrase, I am not the scum on the bottom of anyone's shoe, and I deserve to mourn the deaths tolling higher. I deserve to demand more than deaths tolling higher. Why are you so angry? Sometimes when I speak, there are too many stares like graveyard fog. What are you seeing? Eat your tears. My crown is made of carob, taste acquired. I am tired of holding insecurity close as lover. I am pushing against enough and moving forward. I will wear my crown. I have realized in all my yearnings, the sun will kiss my skin anyway. The moon will sing to me if I am listening, cherished. Moments blessed by my own confession, sing instead of apologizing to yourself for the ways you are in need. Open, cracked mouth to song, and in the early light there is an omen, a crow, full and dark, keeping watch over the street while the day is waking, orange embracing rose in the sky. Thank you.
For sharing that. It's beautiful. And thank you all for being here. It's not easy to talk about mental health challenges in front of a crowd. There is still stigma around it. So we really appreciate you all being willing to be here. And as we've learned through the series, when young people are willing to share their own experiences, we see this ripple effect where more and more people are willing to share their own experiences and feel like it's okay to reach out for help. So it is really powerful. So first of all, can you all tell us briefly what kind of mental health challenges you have experienced and also why you decided to be here today? Who wants to start? Parker, would you mind starting?
Yeah, of course. So I have had experience with depression and anxiety, and by I have had, I mean, I'm still kicking. We're still working our way through that. And I decided to be here today. The reading where I performed the poem that you saw me at was talking about some of my experiences with depression and anxiety, and I think some of the ways that social status or lack of financial means can really just get twisted in that. And so being able to talk about things and being able to share a space with people, sharing voices, I think that's why I wanted to be here today, to talk about some of what I experienced and to just be in this space where it's okay, because I think that's important.
Yeah, thank you. Amaya?
So I've dealt with depression as well as insecurity. And a lot of it was from my 8th grade year up until now. And I would like to be in this space today because I wanted to share with others so that others feel that it is safe to speak about it, because in my opinion, I wasn't comfortable speaking about it until another meeting that Rory was a part of, and I wasn't comfortable like opening up or crying or anything like that, but I am now, and I want people to understand that they're not alone, and I want people to listen to us and understand that we're not making this up and they're not fabrications.
Thank you.
I'm Alex, and I have experience with anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. And I'm here today because I think the first step in improvement is conversation. And I think it is so important to set an example that it's okay to talk about your mental health, and it's okay to have problems, and it's okay to not be okay sometimes, because so many people struggle because they're too embarrassed or too shy to talk about it. And so that's why I'm here today.
Thank you. Jessie? Can you tell us what kind of mental health challenges you've had?
I had compulsive, like what she has.
Yeah.
I've dealt with stress, anxiety, and I have Tourette syndrome, and a bunch of depression, and I've dealt with anorexia, because, I think I'm too fat, and
Yeah, that does it. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. That was great. Okay, so something that's often hard for adults who want to help or peers who want to help is that mental health challenges are often invisible, and they show up in different ways. Someone who's experiencing a lot of mental health challenges might be sitting calmly or chatting and being social or acting out. So my question for you all is, what challenges have you dealt with that people don't see, and how do you feel like you've been misunderstood?
I guess I'll start. So at school, I laugh, like I love laughing. I just love having fun. So a lot of the times people think that when I make a joke about me being sad or me going through things, they think that I'm making a joke or I'm playing. And I'm not. And sometimes they don't understand the cry for help. So to me, I feel alone. And I've been through experiences at school actually recently where friends thought I was pulling away because I didn't want to be friends with them, but it was actually an internal battle with myself. And most of the time that they thought that I was just a person to just cut people off because I didn't feel like I wanted to be friends with you anymore, or it was their fault that I wasn't friends with them anymore, but that wasn't the case. So a lot of times you can be misread because of the personality that you showed to people. So if you do like to laugh a lot, if you are very shy, they misread that as the person that you are, but actually you have other things going on, and sometimes they don't know how to pry or ask questions, so they will also leave you alone, and they won't want to engage with you because that they think it's themselves. So just to open that up, it's like okay to pry, it's okay to ask questions because sometimes people need that so they can't open up.
Thanks, that's really good advice. Alex?
I think one of the biggest challenges is learning to be comfortable opening up to others. So I know for me personally, for a long time, I would just keep everything to myself and was too scared to talk to others about it. I think a big movement in that was when I started to be comfortable talking to my family and my friends. It showed them that it's okay to reach out and ask questions, because I know a lot of the problem with mental health is that people don't understand. And so my friends will come to me and ask me, like, what is it like to have a panic attack? How can I help you if you have one? Like, what should we do? And it's just the questions like these that are so important to ask and to answer, because without this communication, some people may never know like what it's like, or even that someone is dealing with things like this.
Yeah, I think speaking on things that I've experienced that people might not quite be able to see or perceive, I think one thing that some well-meaning people sometimes do is want to limit mental illness or distress to like a convenient time frame. So with a lot of disorders, there are ups and downs, right? So there will be times where it's easier to manage, or times where maybe it's not something that's weighing on you as heavily. And sometimes when I'm in a state where my symptoms like aren't as severe, or like my depression is in a remission, and I'm like, hey, let me try and catch up on all the things that fell apart when I wasn't doing well. And so I think sometimes people see the period of time where you're doing well, and they don't quite realize that sometimes from the person who is experiencing the stress or mental illness, we are aware that this is a period of time where it's better, and that worse might be on the horizon, or often is on the horizon. And so I think in terms of supporting someone with a mental illness or mental distress, being aware that there are going to be those fluctuations, and when they're able to show up a little bit more fully in different areas of their life, that doesn't always mean that they've suddenly regained a new lease on life and everything that's ever ailed them is fixed. So if they are needing more support in the future, maybe don't respond with a "what again" type of attitude, or "oh, this is something you're still struggling with this. I thought we like addressed this in 2011." Well, it's something that goes up and down. So I'm still here. It's still here, and we still have to find new ways and challenges to address it moving forward.
Great points. Jesse, do you feel like you've been misunderstood?
At Glen Hills Middle School, I feel like I've been misunderstood a couple of times. There isn't that much, well, like I don't really get bullied at school, but I know other people do. So like there was this one time when, you know, since one of my tics is like screaming and yelling inappropriate words, like my friends, my peers, they didn't understand that I didn't want to do them. It was a tic. They probably thought that I wanted to do them and I liked doing it, but I didn't. So then, like, a couple of years ago, they started to tell me and ask me to, like, do things, like inappropriate stuff, and to scream and to yell. And so I did that, but I thought they were just trying to be funny. I thought they were trying to be my friends. And then soon enough, I understand they weren't really being funny. They weren't really being nice. And so, you know, one time in science class, you know, one of my friends, he told me to shout, and then one of my friends next to me, he just nodded his head and stared at me, saying like, just don't do it. And so I didn't do it. And you know, after a long time, those friends that kind of told me to do those inappropriate things, they didn't understood. And then once I told them about my mental health and stuff, they understood, and then they stopped doing it.
Yeah,
They're
thank you
like,
for
now
sharing that.
we're best friends.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I remember when you told me that story before, you talked about, you know, the student who told you, like, no, you don't have to yell.
Yeah.
They really felt like an ally to you in
Yeah.
that situation.
Mhm.
Which makes me think of our discussion earlier about programs that try to help students really be upstanders and stand up for each other
I
at
mean, the
school.
people that were telling me to do those inappropriate things, I knew that they weren't trying to hurt my feelings. They didn't understand that it was kind of hurting me. But then once they understood, they were really nice. And they stopped doing it because they learned that, like, I didn't want to do it.
That's good, yeah.
They, like, fixed their mistake.
That's awesome. So I wanted to ask about something that came up earlier where we talked about school structure and homework and how stressful that can be for students. I see some heads nodding. Can you speak to that? Do you think, what could your schools do to make things better for your mental wellness?
So, yeah, I guess I'll start then. It's my like junior year of high school, and I am at Rufus King, so international baccalaureate school, and it's a very rigorous education. So it can be very, very overwhelming, and when you add in the social aspect and the emotional aspect and your home aspect, if it's not going well, it can really become a struggle personally. Like I've personally dealt with that. So all of the classes that I'm doing this year are IB besides one. So a lot of the work, it has you up late sometimes, but it's worth it because of what are they called? The opportunities, yeah, the opportunities that you get after you finish. But at home, my home structure it's a great home structure, but it doesn't have everything that I sometimes need, especially from both parents. So that doesn't help as well. And with social aspects, I've been struggling with that since probably freshman year. Like I've gotten better with it within my junior year because I'm working past the depression. I'm working past the insecurities, though it is still hard. I had to choose who was best to be around me because some of the people that I was choosing to be around were continuing to pull me down. Some were pulling the race card with me. So I think a lot of the times it's okay, like at school, to talk about them and to address as a parent to pry a little more because I do have struggles with my mother. Well, she's not great with how she ask questions, and it can sometimes be a little aggressive, so I'm not so open to explaining like what's going on with me. So it's okay to pry in a little different way and give the child time to say something, because for a minute I would never have said anything. I had to go to my dad and talk to him about it, when she's a great and awesome support system. But just to give the child a chance to say something, like if you ask them one day, you ask them on Sunday, it's okay to give them a few days and ask them on Wednesday, or ask them on Thursday, or just ask them how their day going, or just give them a text in the morning, like, good morning, I hope you have a good day, like, I love you. Like, that type of stuff helps me get through my day and make sure everything is okay with me, and especially at school. So, yeah.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Anyone else have thoughts on that one?
Okay, I'll go. So I'm currently a freshman here at Marquette, and something that I really appreciate is how advertised our counseling department and everything is, and our resources for mental health. And like it was mentioned before, I'm part of Active Minds, which is a mental health organization here at Marquette. And so I think a big thing that schools could do is just let students know that there are resources available and that it's okay to go to them and it's okay to use them. So I feel like a lot of times students would be too embarrassed to go and talk to the counselor and say, like, I need help, because just that step is, I think, one of the hardest ones. But something that's really great, my high school that I just graduated from this past year, St. Francis in Illinois, they have a lot of resources set up for students who are struggling with their mental health. Like they had passes that you could get. So if you were to have a panic attack or something in class, you just give the pass to your teacher and you can go to the counseling office until you can recompose yourself, until you're ready to go back to class. Because I know it's hard to have a panic attack in public, and it's just something that no one really knows how to handle because you're around friends or we're strangers, and it's just like a challenging thing to deal with. So I think that was a great resource that I think would be really beneficial for a lot of schools out there. And just having more opportunities to potentially, I don't know, maybe like screen for mental health. 'Cause I know for me, I always thought that I was just like dramatic or like normally anxious like everyone else. And then I started to realize that like other people weren't dealing with their stress the quite same way I was. So just like having resources or the information out there to know like that if you potentially have anxiety or depression, like what are some signs of that, so that students themselves can be more aware and know that they're not alone and that what they're dealing with can be helped and can be treated. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And one of the things that we found in our reporting is that oftentimes the most effective place to put mental health services is right in the schools, because so often it's transportation barriers or a lack of health insurance that stops kids from getting care. And that's something that Governor Walker put some money in the budget for last round, and Governor Evers has proposed expanding. And Milwaukee Public Schools has a partnership with some private therapists here. There's information about that outside. But a lot of schools don't have that, and as we talked about earlier, there are shortages of guidance counselors and school psychologists and nurses and social workers. So I was wondering if you all could talk about, what additional supports you'd like to see. And Jesse, if we could start with you. I know you've talked about how it's been helpful when you're able to see a guidance counselor at school, but you're not always able to do that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, is this working?
Yeah, you're good.
So, wait. So we only have one guidance counselor. I really wish there would be like a like 2 or 3, at least one school therapist. But our guidance counselor, she's kind of like a school therapist, but she isn't. She means well. I mean, she lets kids come to her office when she needs help, but when the students need help, because a lot of students in my school have like mental disabilities, like mental health issues and stuff, so they come to her office a lot, but most of the times she's like busy, her door is closed and it's locked because she has lots of meetings to tend to and lots of kids to like fetch from the classes and stuff. And so, she's she's sometimes available. And I remember in one part of the year, she was just super busy. It was really rare that she was actually available. So, so I just really wish there was because I remember going to her office and seeing her door closed and trying to open it, but it was locked. And so that means that she's in a 6-hour meeting or or like or like trying to get some kids out classrooms. And so I was like having a panic attack and stuff, and so I didn't really know what to do because she wasn't there and her door was closed. And so I really wish that there was like a like in my school, like there are more resources, because even though we have a fair amount of resources, we need a lot more, and we need more. I feel like that we do need more guidance counselors and at least like a couple, and at least like a school therapist, because Miss Tatum, I feel like she writes things down about kids' problems with bullying, but she doesn't have any time to do
I bet
about
a lot
it.
of
And I
people
feel
in
like
this
a
room
school
can relate
therapist,
to that, being stretched thin.
I feel like a school therapist would be able to do that.
Yeah.
When when Miss Tatum, our school counselor, is busy with stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. Anyone else have thoughts?
I think it would be really helpful to have maybe just some sort of program or information available for how to cope and deal with your mental health. So I know a lot of people, especially with anxiety, it can get worse if you don't learn how to like release it or handle it. So for me, sometimes I'll be too busy to take the time to do something to like, I don't benefit my mental health and just like try to come down from the high stress I'm dealing with. So just having even just like information available in the school, like tips for handling a panic attack or when you're anxious or when you're really stressed out, and just having some ideas that maybe if the school doesn't have the resources to provide those resources for handling or bettering mental health, just having that information available at the bare minimum so that students can try to like learn from that and work with it with their own support systems if the schools can't be the support system themselves. But obviously my hope is that the schools will get the means and the funding to have their own guidance counselors or school therapists, people that can help with those problems themselves.
I agree. I think just having like a pamphlet or a piece of paper available to the student, because in a school where, we have 1,500 students and we have 4 counselors and, two school psychologists or therapists that you can talk to, that's sometimes not useful because there's not even enough time in the day to get to every single student. So for me, I'm better at reading things and then taking in the information and then choosing what I want to do with it. So I don't always need to talk to somebody. But I feel like if a student does choose to come to you, brushing it off or trying to rush the student or even giving general statements, because a lot of the times when I'm talking to an adult, I'll know a general statement that they've probably said to a million other students. And I'm like, hey, like that was not helpful. Like, that was not helpful at all. So to kind of like gauge with the student's character, even if you don't know them, try to like understand like where they're coming from, because giving them the same statement that you gave to, another student that's a freshman, giving a junior the same advice you gave to a freshman is like 2 different things, despite what we're going through, even if we were going through the same thing, because the situations can be very different. So just with the statements and just having the pieces of paper, the pamphlets or the books that you can just pick up and go and read on your own is very useful.
I think too, students who experience mental illness are able to succeed. Like, we can do it, but we might need a little bit more structure and support. And I think one thing that I found navigating undergrad and now grad school, and also just like the narrative of what success looks like. If you watch like a documentary or something about people who made it and they're like, oh, I had this great mentor and I had this great mentor and I had this great mentor. It's hard to make a mentor when you're having trouble to like get out of bed, right? Or when you have bad relationships with people because You're the person who's turning in assignments late. It's hard to build the connections that are supposed to propel you forward when to hold up your end of the bargain means working through your mental health and your struggles first, and then showing up in like a well-presented form so that someone's ready to help you along your path. And so I think sometimes when people talk about their stories, it is luck if you find someone that you've really connected with in a staff member or someone else in the field who can guide you along. Like, that's something really special. And I think we should make those types of connections more accessible. And I think sometimes that can happen with language and with education of the people who are potential mentors, or looking at ways to structure schools that allow for various modems of success. I would be very wealthy if I had $1 for every time someone said, "You're a great student, but you're one of the most competent people in my class, but you're one of the brightest students in here, but," and it's kind of like, and the wall that's being hit is the struggles that I've encountered because of mental health most of the time. So it's like I've had people encourage me towards my dreams, like, "Oh, you could be like this person, or this person, or this person," but we don't talk about that in-between space where when we're struggling. I can't be Oprah because I'm not Oprah, I'm Parker, and what does it look like for Parker to be right here, right now, and to be okay, and to feel supported, and to not have to look at this lofty version of what I can be and strive towards that, but be supported in what I am now and what I'm trying to accomplish now. I don't want to be seen just for my potential to accomplish. I want to be supported in what I am actively working to accomplish. And I might have fallen off of a little bit, but it's still there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And yeah, I think what we've learned, one of the most important factors for resilience is having a positive relationship with an adult. And there are some schools they've set up a system where all the teachers get in a room and they say what students they have a positive relationship with, who they feel like would reach out to them if they need help. And then they look and they see what students are missing from that list, and then they make sure someone reaches out to them. Because a lot of times students are able to just kind of fall through the cracks. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we will be opening it up to the audience. So we talked a lot earlier about bullying, so I just want to hear from you guys. Have you witnessed bullying at your school? What does it look like, and what do you think should be done about it?
So I guess the example that comes to mind is more tied to my undergrad experience. So I studied creative writing and psychology at Knox College. And I think while that was holistically, I think more of a space to where bullying and that type of harassment was discouraged, there were definitely instances, as I think there are in many schools. And I think one thing that a few people my year experienced who are women or femmes is experiences of sexual shaming or slut shaming, whatever that may be. And I think that was something that was really harmful for students. So I think freshman year was traumatic for a lot of people, trying to adjust to college and trying also to adjust to the ways that you will be perceived and judged by other people. And I think in the space of being away at a school, which most of us were, away from home at this 4-year institution, so to be away at a school around strangers and to be connected with labels that were harmful or weren't true to you and were pervasive, right? When people share certain harmful words, I think that can be spread along social networks, and it can influence the way people are treated. So I think I'm thinking back on experiences to where people felt unsafe at parties, right? Like there's this idea of the type of person that I am. And so now when I want to be at this space to have fun, I don't feel quite safe because people are already looking to me as someone who is more easily victimized because this type of violence is, or sexuality is a part of my identity. And so I think that was something that harmed a lot of women. And I think that's something that I've heard from people at various institutions as well. But I think that kind of speaks to language as a tool to kind of spread ways to harm people, especially when it's not addressed. Yeah.
Especially for identity-based bullying
Right.
and harassment.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So not like going with what you said. So partying, not my thing. Like I don't like going to parties. Like I like staying at home and like reading a book. And I'm thought of as like a nerd for that. I don't care. Like reading is fun. So most of the time I've experienced bullying within my own space. Like I love being at school, or I used to before this year, but I used to enjoy like doing homework and things like that. But a lot of it had to do with like people calling me ugly, or people saying people will never like you, or you're gay because of the way you dress, and it was like different things. And at the moment, I almost didn't know it was bullying. Like I'm like, okay, like why are these people saying these things? Like they don't know anything about me. They've never met me. They've never met my family, like my siblings, like nothing like that. So how are you like making a judgment? So it started to really affect me, like just going through the years. And like, unfortunately, the same people were saying it. And though some of these people, I didn't even know their names, I always knew their faces. Like, I'm like, oh, there's a girl that said that I would never be anything. Oh, there's the girl that said that no boy would ever like me. And I'm like going through school and like, I'm listening and I'm taking it in and I'm absorbing like every single comment. So it's pulling me down farther and farther. So, a lot of my experiences were just like listening and like taking it in, and it wasn't going out the other ear. Like it was just sitting in my head, and it took a toll on my like self-love and things like that, and I didn't have it anymore. So I feel like to help with bullying, the students who are doing it, because there are administrators and there are people that walk past while people are doing the bullying. Now they think it's your friend being funny or they're trying to make a joke about you, but it's not funny because you don't know what it's doing to that person internally. So it's okay to stop the person or stop those two friends despite what they say. Oh, we were just playing. No, stop the people and say, that's not cool. Like you don't know what that person, though you're their friend, you don't know how that's, feeling on them, because friends of mine has said it, administrators looked and they laughed. Like that's not funny. Like it hurt me internally. So I feel like just at least mentioning it or saying it or having seminars at your school or addressing the issue is going to help other students. Though it won't solve every problem, it helps with the process a lot.
Thank you. All right, we're running out of time, but Alex or Jesse, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, do you want to go first?
What was your question?
Oh, what kind of bullying do you see and what do you think should be done about it so that it doesn't happen anymore?
Oh, at my school, I've never really seen any bullying, but I've heard about kids that were getting bullied in Miss Tatum's office. Like when she's available, I just lay in her on her couch, and these kids come in and say that they're got bullied and stuff, that this one person is annoying them and it's like irritating them and bullying them. And so I really feel like there is some bullying, but it's not as much as others. Because I never got bullied for some reason. I don't know why, but I know other people get bullied a lot in my school. So but then when they report to someone that bullied them, to Miss Tatum and stuff, she doesn't really have any time to deal with it and stuff, to do something about it, which makes me kind of worried and sad for the other person, because that kid will just keep annoying her over and over and over again. And I think Yeah, and I think the reason I'm not bullied, I don't know, is because people know me and I have lots of friends and they just know what will annoy me and stuff. But I think the other reason why I'm not bullied, is because like I bet if someone tried to bully me, like saying you're ugly and stuff, I would just say I know. I wouldn't really like fight back. I wouldn't really feel anything from that because
You wouldn't let it get to you.
it wouldn't get to me because I've already felt like I'm ugly, and then it's like they're agreeing with me, and so like like
Thanks for sharing that. You're not ugly. And I think you've been really strong. And I'm glad it sounds like you have a lot of friends who stick up for you too. And I think that's also awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. Alex, do you want to add anything?
So I'm lucky enough to have not had many experiences with bullying, but I think to an extent, which I wouldn't necessarily describe as bullying, is I've experienced people using mental health as a punchline and treating it as a joke. Or if I'm experiencing one of my compulsions and people being like, stop, like, that's annoying. And because I can't stop myself, and just experiencing things like that. Or people trying to diminish your mental health problems, being like, oh, you're just stressed out, which I think can come from all sorts of people, like teachers, people older than you, or students and peers. And so I think that can be fixed with a better understanding of mental health and what mental health challenges entail. Because I think a lot of the joking comes from a sense of being uncomfortable about talking about mental health. And I think if people understood better, they would be less likely to make jokes like these because they would know and understand better and know the effect that it can have on people.
All right, thank you. We'll do one quick question from the audience. Sorry, we didn't have time for more. Does anyone have one that they'd like to ask? Yeah.
This was very interesting, and I appreciate you sharing your experiences. I shared on Facebook that always be kind to people because you have no idea what's going on in their lives or in their head. And I was wondering if social media has affected you at all.
Going off of that, yes, especially like in high school, I know I keep saying that, but everyone goes on Snapchat. Everybody goes on Instagram. Like I try to stay away from it because every time you see it, it's, what a girl's supposed to look like. Like she's supposed to have this butt and she's supposed to have this and that. But, if you don't have that, then you go to school feeling like, you're not enough. And social media plays a big role in just making people feel like they're not worth anything, or they'll never have people like them because they don't look like this perfect figure. So I feel like a lot of that like social media stuff, it should be reported because like a lot of those make people feel like they could never get anywhere, and which leads to a decline in their mental stability, and then it creates more problems, and then more problems that the adults or their friends don't know how to handle. So.
Awesome, thank you. We're gonna have to leave it at that. Sorry, we don't have more time. Thank you so much. That was just amazing insight and advice. And now we will have a 15-minute break. There are bathrooms behind the elevators back there, refreshments outside the room, and we'll be starting promptly again at 10:30.
All right, it is 10:30. This is a very cooperative group, I must say. By the way, a compliment to you. I thought the questions during the session with Dr. Holt were so well put, and so many of them, and that was an indicator to me of the engagement all of you have with this whole subject, and so I appreciate that. I thought the kids in the second panel were terrific. I mean, jaw-dropping. And I thought Dr. Holt had a lot to say. So we had a great first half. I'm hopeful and confident we're going to have a great second half, which will be the panel of people who are actually working in the school situations and education, and followed by a panel of what we're labeling policymakers, which is to say 2 legislators and 2 people who are involved in other capacities in policymaking. So and we do have evaluation forms that some of you may have taken as you were coming in, or you can get as you're going out later. One other announcement, there will be a box lunch at the end that you're welcome to take and go on, but even better if you have the time to take and hang around here with each other, because this is obviously a community. There's a sense of connectedness, I think, among everybody here, and so if you have a chance to socialize or talk or swap professional concerns, feel free to hang around here afterwards. So let us turn our attention to the people who actually work in this field. We have 4 excellent people here. I'll start with closest to me here is Dr. Alan Burkhardt, who is a professor with the College of Education at Marquette University. He is chairman of the counseling education program and the counseling psychology program. I actually met him first through his quite extensive work in the last couple years at Penfield Montessori Academy, which is a small but growing charter school that has about, I don't know what it is this year, about 50-50 special ed students, kids with special needs versus whatever label you do use, kids who don't have such needs, but nonetheless a really high support program, and he is an advisor to them. He is going to moderate the discussion and take part in it both. We're paying him double for okay? To his immediate left is Tina Owen Moore. Tina is well known in Milwaukee as the founder and teacher leader, was that the correct title you used there, of the Alliance School, which opened in 2005. It is a Milwaukee Public Schools, what they call instrumentality charter school, which is to say it is staffed by MPS teachers and support people. And it was a nationally significant, nationally recognized program with a strong anti-bullying component, but it was no secret that it was the student body that had included numerous LGBTQ students. It was considered by some the first school in the country that really specialized in serving such students. I mentioned before Tina's new book, which is for sale out here. Tina is finishing her doctoral work at Harvard and will get her degree in May, so congratulations to that, and has been working of late as a doctoral fellow with Chicago Public Schools. So we're pleased to have Tina here. And to her left is Shashina Robinson, is a school psychologist with Milwaukee Public Schools, works 2 days a week in central office working with the RTI, Response to Intervention, you all know these terms, program, and what they call a Tier 3 PBIS work, which is to say kids who have pretty intense needs. And she also works 3 days a week then as a school psychologist at Marvin Pratt School on the north side. And to her left, by the way, I didn't even know until this morning that Tina Owen Moore is a graduate of the Marquette College of Education. We're not intentionally trying to build them up here, but they do have a big role. And to her left is Sabrina Bartles, who is also a graduate of Marquette, is a school counselor in the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District, And I may or may not have surprised her this morning by saying I'm a regular reader of her blog posts through the College of Education blog on what she has seen from students and her experiences. And frankly, that was my idea to invite her, is because I thought her blog posts were so interesting. So take it away.
Thank you, Alan. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here. We're delighted as a panel to be with you and to kind of talk about these issues. And really, our goal today is to kind of give you a sense of what's happening locally and what we're doing, and really what the day-to-day looks like in terms of the work that we do. I've asked each of the panelists if they can kind of reintroduce themselves and specifically speak about what they see their role in the schools and what they're doing, but also if they could provide an example of some of the work that they've done, and particularly the impact of student mental health issues on learning, so that we begin to kind of tie this to some of the academic issues that we see in the schools. So our goal is really to give you a picture and to give you a sense of what things look like. And there are a few questions I'll kind of start with in terms of moderating the panel, but I'll also leave questions then for the audience today. And so if I can kind of turn to Tina, and I'll have her start in terms of the introduction and example.
Thank you, thank you. As they both mentioned, Tina Owen Moore, and I started as a high school English teacher here in Milwaukee. And as an English teacher, recognized that a lot of students were being bullied or experiencing abuse, there wasn't a lot of research on how to address that and how to do that in a school community. So when Bill Gates gave an opportunity to start small schools, I, with a group of teachers, took it upon myself to write a proposal and to start a school here in Milwaukee with a mission of addressing bullying and teaching others to do the same, because we didn't just want to take students out and leave problems behind. We really wanted to create something that helped all schools to be better places for young people. So the Alliance School has been going on for 14 years now, and still very successful in doing this work. And the thing that I would say really helped to build our model was an understanding of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and really starting from the very beginning with the idea that if young people are in a state of fight or flight, they cannot focus on pursuits of higher education in any form or fashion. So we as a school community had a responsibility to meet the students' needs, whatever they may be. So thank you.
I am Shashina Robinson. I'm a school psychologist with Milwaukee Public Schools now for 18 years. And primarily I've worked in elementary schools, and then about 5 years ago, I started doing some district-wide work with the PBIS RTI district-wide team around intensive interventions for behaviors in the school setting, and working to train and support staff around implementing those interventions in school. I believe the question also, what were some of the things that we were seeing in the school setting? And just from my small system, my environment in the school setting, some of the things that we kind of face are being here in Milwaukee, are issues around trauma as well as poverty. Students are experiencing rates of depression. Bullying is a big issue. Bullying of identity, race is a big issue for many of our students when we talk about mental health, as far as like how they're adequately receiving services or how things are being identified for them, as well as a lot of different stressors on students that cause students to have some anxiety and experience a level of not being able to cope with some of those stressors. So I think I answered that.
Yeah.
I'm Sabrina Bartels. I am a school counselor at a middle school in the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District. I have been there for 6 years now, and it's been a really interesting experience for me, coming from Greendale, Wisconsin, which is very small, right near Southridge Mall, if you know where that is. Or Cops, that's the other place I always recommend too there. But coming from there and then going to West Dallas, which is one of the top 10 largest school districts in the state, and going to a school now where almost 70% or more of my students qualify for free or reduced lunch, with a lot of that socioeconomic struggles that they have there. I see a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety among my students, a lot of trauma. Primarily, when I think of trauma, I think a lot of times with my students who come from single-parent homes, and a lot of my students then, as a result, are the second parent to younger siblings. So I have students where they're the oldest of four, and they're the ones who are making sure their younger siblings get to school, get dinner, like do their homework, get to bed kinds of things. So that's been something that I really focus on a lot when it comes to meeting with my students.
And again, I'm Alan Burkhardt. I have been a professor here for about 19 years, although in my background I was a school counselor in New York City schools and worked particularly with foster care kids in that system. Also have worked with mental health on the college setting. And more recently, I'm the consulting psychologist with the behavior clinic through Penfield. So we treat young kids 0 to 5 on trauma issues. So that's the nature of my work. So let me just kind of start with this idea that we've heard a little bit about that students are faced with lots of stressors and lots of mental health issues. And I kind of wanted us to talk a little bit more about that in terms of examples and kind of the range of stressors that you're seeing among students in your schools. And maybe we could start with you, Tina. Would that be okay?
Okay, sure. There are so many stressors. For us at the Alliance School, so many of the stressors had to do with poverty and trauma, like a lot of the trauma. At one point, looking at our school roster, 25% of our students were homeless or in foster care. They had a lot of mobility between residencies. They were dealing a lot of stressors on the way to school, and just needing a lot of supports in finding access to resources. And families were too. So families relied on us heavily to help them connect with the resources they need in the community. And we did a lot of work around helping young people to transition emotionally into the space. Like, how do you help people come into a space and calm and know that they're in a safe place and connect to the people around them, and to know that they could ask for what they need in the space.
And what one of the students stated before around the fact that, like, I went to the counselor's office and I wasn't able to see her. It was one of the things that kind of plays in my head over and over again, being a school psychologist, not in the building full time, and I do have other obligations around special education. But some of the things that students face with that stress is just what Tina was saying about not having the coping strategies, not having the ability to self-regulate themselves or deal with a trauma that happened to them prior to coming and stepping into the school building. I believe that students are stressed with the amount of, I don't want to get in trouble, but just thinking about our education system, part of the conversation that we were talking about before, just that added stress of we have to get, this grade as a school, we have to get this grade as a state. For Milwaukee Public Schools, we have to make sure our students are in attendance. We have to make sure that we're focused on reading, writing, and math. We have to make sure we're bringing up those test scores. And I think a lot of times we lose a little bit of that social emotional learning for students. And I know that in Milwaukee Public Schools, we've been having a big push around like doing mindfulness with students and teachers, as well as like some of that social emotional learning on how to identify feelings, how to be able to express yourself, how to have that empathy for one another. But I think that if you live in Milwaukee or know a little bit about Milwaukee, we know that, as Tina was mentioning, that poverty plays a big issue in the success of our students, and part of the issues that they are facing, housing, just reliable employment for families, capacities of families to be able to provide that type of support for their students to get them in school so that learning can happen. So stress lies around those educational issues as well as just our daily living type of issues.
And I think being the age that students are too plays a really big impact. So like in middle school, everyone is still trying to fit in and learn who they are and what they like and what they don't like and who, what are good friend groups and what aren't. So I think like when you look at that, and then you add on the fact that they, with depression and ADHD, anxiety, I think that just really compounds things too.
I think one of the things, I kind of wanted to pick up on something that Shoshana said, noting earlier Dr. Holt referred to the rates or the ratio of staff to students. And particularly in school counseling, here in the state, it's about 450 to 1. But one of the things that we don't note is when school counselors, for example, are active with students. So the model actually suggests that we should be involved with them about 80% of the time, and that's something that we often lose focus on when we're talking about service or access to services. So when I heard the students talk about access to the school counselor earlier, the thing that I was wondering is, was the school counselor doing testing services? Were they doing scheduling? Were they doing all of the things that actually school counselors shouldn't be doing? So, and I would imagine the same things would exist for school psychs, school social workers, and I don't know if Shoshana, you would want to perhaps comment on that particular issue in regards to school psychs?
In regards to school psychologists in Milwaukee Public Schools, we wear a wide variety of hats, and I think that we all want to be in that direct service to students, but with the high referring rates for special education, a lot of times that gets in the way of sometimes that direct service to students who may not have special education needs. So either you're servicing classrooms with students who have particular special education needs, or you're doing evaluations, or doing paperwork for evaluations, or having meetings around that. So I think that it's true that we kind of face some of the same issues. Maybe some of our responsibilities are still related to our job, but they still kind of overwhelm us in our ability to be able to work with students directly one-on-one, more often if they're not in special education, sometimes when they are.
Good. Would anyone else like to comment? Or?
Yeah, I think that we're always making choices about resources in that context. And, for example, when we first started the school, we recognized right away we needed a full-time social worker. We could not do what we were doing without a full-time social worker. But that also made choices about social worker, guidance counselor, like what is the focus going to be? And it's sad that we would even have to make a decision about that. In our case, we decided to have a social worker because as teachers, we could take on some of those guidance counseling responsibilities. So then as teachers, we were also guidance counselors. And so the work has to be done to support kids no matter what. It's not like you can just let it go and the kids will be okay, but that means it has to go somewhere. And the resources make it really challenging.
Absolutely. So I wonder now if we can kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about what specifically is happening in your schools. How are we intervening on these particular issues and providing services? So what do you do? And maybe we can start this time down at the end with Sabrina.
Yeah. So, we do a lot of, there are definitely like two types of things that we do. So there is the prevention side of things. So that's where in our elementary schools, we have SEL lessons that we do to talk to students about like their social emotional health. And then the other side of it is the crisis kind of intervention that we do, which is an automatic response to when something happens. So, like I said, we have our SEL lessons at the elementary school. We build on those in middle school as well, where we talk to our students about we talked about bullying and what are toxic friendships, and kind of being able to identify, start to identify signs of suicide, and what the difference is then between reporting and telling an adult versus what is, as my students say, what's snitching and what, things like that. And then on the intervention side, what we do is it's a lot of that one-to-one service. What does that student need in that moment that we can help provide and get them to a better, stronger emotional place, so that then they can continue to go back to class and learn and be successful there as well.
And in my role as a school psychologist, again, we have the prevention and the intervention side of our role. We work in Milwaukee Public Schools. In the school setting that I'm in, we have that multi-tier system of support. So using that PBIS framework, where we have expectations set for students at what we call a tier 1 level, and then we're constantly screening. Students can self-refer, or teachers can refer, or parents can refer for the next level of intervention. Might include small group on social skills building. I also work individually with students, doing just some counseling around, like, what can you do to help make yourself okay with being in class today, or what do you need today in order to be able to meet your goals for yourself. I know school-wide at a tier 1 level, we implement the second step program by a committee for children, and then as we just try to have that language of the positive goal setting. What do you want to do for yourself today to be successful in school? And then at the tier 3 level, we have those intensive interventions, and for the elementary school age students, we have what's called educational wraparound, which we adopted from the Illinois PBIS school system, and we work with families in getting their voice and choice, and trying to figure out what their big needs are and how to best address those for students. And that is when we build teams around one family, one student, versus having multiple students to one adult. It's when we're building teams and putting those services in place around students and their families individually. So as you can see, with one person in the building only 3 days a week, sometimes that can get a little bit challenging. So we try to address the needs as they come up in that way.
And then for us at Alliance, the core of our practice has to do with building relationships. So we start with a quote that says, "If you can see yourself in others, whom can you harm?" And we work really hard to build connections between students, between adults, between the community, so that people know each other's story and they're less likely to cause harm. And we talk about harm, and whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's our responsibility to address and repair harm when we've caused it. And so we use a lot with restorative practices. We do it for community building and for repairing harm and for solving problems. We have systems. We work really hard on our systems and teaching young people about difference and about mental health issues. Like, we had a lot of students with Asperger's in our schools, so we taught all the students about Asperger's so that they would know how to relate to somebody with Asperger's, because it's going to be different than, typically you might with your friend. And so we really try to work hard to make sure that all of our groups in our school are recognized and represented through our curriculum and everything like that. And then we also have responsive practices. So we have systems in place for reporting harm and repairing harm. We teach young people how to report cyberbullying, and how to, like, if somebody sees something on Facebook, if 5 students report it right away, Facebook will take it down. So we teach them how to be empowered about taking care of that harm as a community. So it's all of our responsibility.
So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to kind of open it up to the audience. So we've talked about some of the practices that are going on in the school. I'm kind of wondering, so what stops us from implementing some of the practices that we know are effective practices? In a sense, what gets in the way?
Time. I think just time. It's whether it's I think time with students, with caseloads the way they are. I think that's a really big struggle, and I think time for outside, like for families as well. So we have we have St. A's come in. They actually partnered with us to come into our school, and they meet with students 2 days a week. And that eliminates then parents having to take off of work or having to find transportation to get them there. They already have come to school, and that makes it easy. But yeah, I just think time in general.
Time in the sense of that competing with what needs to be done for educational purposes for students in schools and what schools and districts are trying to accomplish for students, just from the educational side. It's when you talk about doing some of those social emotional learning skills for students in classrooms, like when do you do it? What's getting pushed aside to be able to do that when it could be really incorporated in everything, but I think that sometimes we have that competition or that idea that we can't do all of these things. So we just need to figure out a way to make sure that all students are getting the resources they need. And also just awareness, I believe. A lot of people, when you walk into the school building, you walk in thinking like, today, if you're a teacher, this is what I have to teach. If I'm walking in the school building today, I have to accomplish this testing, I have to accomplish this meeting with this student, I have to accomplish these observations. So we're just kind of all going in on our own path instead of thinking about what ways we can kind of work together and make sure that we're meeting the needs of students in that way. So it's kind of the time and competing, other competing factors and resources.
Yeah, resources. And then I also think a lot of times these things can be perceived as the soft stuff. Like this is the soft skills. This is the relational stuff isn't as important. And yet, if you think about it from an employer perspective, like you want employees who work well together. You want people who have the resiliency. So I think if we can shift that narrative to think about how these are essential skills to develop, these are important for health outcomes and societal outcomes, then we can really change that conversation. But as long as it's seen as the soft stuff, then it's really hard to get it to be core in the work that we do in schools.
And valued.
And valued, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So let me at this point kind of turn it out to the audience and see what kinds of questions you might have.
My question involves, what are you seeing in your schools that you might be able to directly link to the daily barrage of harassment and bullying that we receive from, let's just say, someone who lives in Washington, D.C., and we hear him every night in the evening news harassing people. What really have you noticed in schools in terms of increases in harassment of other students or faculty and staff?
Yeah, I know there's been a couple of research studies that show that in communities where where voting supported our presidency, the president, that bullying rates have gone up. So I think there's something there that's telling about when you empower that kind of language and that kind of seeing groups as others, that it trickles down. And if our young people are watching, they are. And I think we have to do so much more intentional work about building bridges between communities and really recognizing the assets and values in everybody.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it can be linked directly to rhetoric that's being said out of Washington, D.C., but just one of the things that is central in my mind right now is just thinking about race in general. And students are bullied because of their skin color or bullied because they are different than other students. in the way of their skin color. So just thinking about race as a whole and thinking about that in Milwaukee and how that plays out for some of our students. And some students may be more of a target because of that, is kind of one of the things that I kind of try to keep my eye on and try to keep that lens in place for myself when I'm talking with students who may be bullied, and what some of their concerns are when they come and report, like whether or not they're having difficulty with their peers, if that's one of the reasons why. But I think that that's kind of, when we think about bullying being different, is one of the reasons why it's held into place. Like people see themselves different or better, or and so they find something to pick out from somebody else. But that's one of the things that I've kind of been focused on, especially the last couple of years. I don't know if that's directly related, but.
And I think social media as well. So I know there's a lot of focus on Twitter, but I think for our students, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, I think that, that because that is such a vehicle and a more anonymous way of doing it, I think that's influenced our students a little bit more. Whether that's a direct correlation, obviously, I'm not sure, but we do see that.
Hi, so curious in some, I've checked out some longitudinal studies about PBIS programs, and some that I've read have suggested that once the staff buy in after all of the training and executing, that staff morale goes up. And I'm wondering if you've seen that, but then does it also correlate to staff retention year after year, as opposed to almost having to restart and train your educators year after year to make progress in it?
Good question.
I can't speak from an administrative point of view. I think Tina probably would be better off to speak to that side of it. But just being in a school where PBIS is implemented pretty much with, a high amount of fidelity in the elementary school that I'm in, we don't see a whole lot of staff turnover in that school setting. We do. I do see a closeness with the staff members. I do see that the language is the same across the school building. I know that MPS has also been trying really hard to just target a mindfulness approach, not even with our students, but with adults as well, because when we talk about that caregiver fatigue and having a way to kind of rebuild ourselves and make sure that we're showing up in a positive space for students, that's also been kind of a collaborative effort from the district-wide PBIS team, as well as those who are doing the work around trauma-informed care, which is our violence prevention department. So I do, for me, on that small scale, I see it, but also thinking from a larger scale, district-wide, the mobility, as you mentioned before, can kind of be an issue, because if we kind of have a lot of staff turnover, there is a lot of retraining, a lot of building that school language, that school-specific language and climate, and it can be tough. Mm-hmm. But you probably.
I think that, a lot of our practice would have been aligned with PBIS practices, for sure. And the staff buy-in and community was strong. And I think that that's something that you see, that there's a lot of research to support that when staff are empowered and part of, developing those systems that support young people, there is better staff retention, and same thing with young people when they're part of that process. So that empowerment and buy-in is so key to that retention and job satisfaction and taking care of each other for the vicarious trauma that people are experiencing in schools.
I think that you mentioned a really good point earlier, Tina, is that if we really look at the basis of PBIS and why it was started and why it is successful, is because of the relationships that are being built. So, and I think that's really true for staff as well, is the fact that staff feels cared for and supported just as much as the students do as well.
Chris?
Thank you.
We work with young kids at Penfield Children's Center, and we find that our programs are really dual generation. And I wonder how your programs have made an impact, or if you do other programming for the families themselves, because when the kids go home, they might be experiencing something very different than what they've been taught in school.
You know, I'll tell you one of the things I was really proud of was and excited about was we started doing restorative practices with our families too. And we started our school year, instead of doing orientation the way, you know, we're going through schedule and you're going to find your lockers, we sat in circles and gave families the opportunities to sit in circles and share stories about their children. You know, what were they anxious about with their child starting high school? What did they love most about their child? What did they want? What were their dreams for their child? And I'll tell you, just starting the year like that was one of the most powerful things in building those relationships, and that sustained through the school year. And so I think that just keep making families part of that community and recognizing that helping to meet their needs is also helping to meet the children's, and together you can do a lot more is really powerful.
I was going to say, when we partnered with St. A's, they ran parent groups at our school as well for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They divided up by grade level. And so that was really helpful because it gave parents a chance to talk to other parents and realize that they're not alone in some of the struggles that they face with their child. And I think a lot of them did feel that way, like, you know, that their child was the only one who ever had experienced this. And so that, you know, empowered parents, and that really helped them develop, you know, skills for that.
And I'm always looking for ways to kind of partner with parents, just me individually in my practice. But I think that with some of the things that MPS has tried, and I'm kind of broadly speaking, but I think that some of the things that have been implemented as a parent coordinator, trying to get at programs that are going to be useful and helpful for parents, and making those personal connections with parents that teachers aren't always able to do on a regular basis. But I think it's important for us to partner with our parents in schools, because school oftentimes is the place where students are identified for mental health issues. We are, you know, part of helping with that treatment for some part of that mental health issue. And so I think it's important that we do partner with parents as much as we can. So please send ideas my way. I welcome them all the time. So.
I know one of the things that we've focused on too at the behavior clinic is actually a lot of advocacy for our parents as well. So, you know, really getting to know the backgrounds, getting to know our parents, and then kind of digging in with them to figure out how we can be a support and help to them. So that's been a really important strategy, and I think it aligns with the relationship building that you're talking about.
And also how they can be a support to us. There are so many talents and skills that parents bring that can make our lives so much easier in schools too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Other questions? There's one way in the back.
In my case, my son, mainstreaming seems to be what everybody thinks is the best, and I would challenge that, because who likes to be different? I don't know a lot of people who like to be different. My son certainly didn't. And our feeling was we were able to save him because we took him out of a school system where he was different, and we put him into a place where he was with other kids facing similar challenges, and he was able to take his armor off and learn. I loved what you said about how the first principle is feeling safe, and he didn't feel safe because he was different. And he was able to learn, and I'm proud to say that he recently graduated from Marquette University in engineering and got a job, and I don't think that would have been the case if we had kept him where he was. So I just wanted to get a reaction to that. And then the other thing I wanted to do is put my NAMI hat on and plug that we have a NAMI walk down at the lakefront on May 18th, and I would love for people to come there, because it's we build a really big community and get mental illness out of the closet. So thank you for responding to my question and coming to the walk.
I think it's really important to give young people opportunities to feel that they're part of a community. So, I mentioned that starting our school was a little bit controversial because we were pulling kids outside, but we were creating a place where being different was like really cool and valued. So I think in any community, young people have to have those spaces where they can feel like they are part of something, their identities are valued, and I hope that we can get to where all schools can be that place for young people, but we have a lot of work to do. So the fact that you were able to give him a space like that, I think is beautiful and good, and because that's what kids need. And I think we can all do the work, continue to do the work to make sure that that's what young kids get everywhere.
That would be a great dream, that we are providing students with what they need in the school setting, regardless of what their difference is. I think that that's kind of tough to do in a public education setting. And so I really applaud, when you guys ventured out and started Alliance, I believe it was kind of amongst educators like, wow, this is really great, especially like school psychologists. But I think that the more we talk to students and families, this is how we figure out how we're going to change education, because we've approached it from the same way since the beginning of education. And until we start to sit down and have these conversations and give our students and families a voice in those conversations, then we're going to continue on the same track, and we'll miss the point that you made. We'll miss those opportunities in those spaces that Tina and the staff created over at Alliance. So I definitely believe in, we need to have those listening ears and working together with families and students to kind of create spaces.
Mm-hmm. And each student is very different, and so each experience for them is very different. So what's right for one student isn't right for everyone. And I always say, when as a counselor, my job, it's a partnership with parents. Parents, I think, know their children 100% better than I do. And so that's, I'm glad that though your son was successful. Congratulations on that for him.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You don't understand why they're different. And so it's a harder one to work with, I think, in a mainstream setting.
Yeah. Thank you. We have time for one last question, so, and maybe a brief response.
Individually, I just wanted to know what was your next step, and not collectively, what are you individually going to do to help with the problem?
That's a great question, because that was actually close to my wrap-up question. So let's wrap up here.
Do you want to start?
I mean, I'm definitely thinking about individually I can do, because it always feels like it's a huge barrier and a huge problem that I think we all have to work together to overcome. I think, though, hearing testimony today from current students really had a huge impact on me. So I think, some of it is being able to advocate for myself as a counselor and being able to ask for more time, in the sense that I have more time for my kids, for my students, instead of the other, for lack of a better term, administrative things that I have to do. So I think that's what I would do.
Me personally, taking into consideration the tips that you guys provided for us today, speaking from the student's perspective, in just bringing some more awareness around mental health issues that students may be facing. So finding ways in my school and the space that I work in to bring that awareness to the school staff as well as family members. And then and in a variety of different ways, because I appreciate the fact that you said that I'm the type of person where I need to read it and then I can absorb it for myself. And so just trying to figure out the best avenues to get that space developed in our school setting. So although sometimes people don't think about mental health for younger students, it's there. And not just pushing it aside and saying, oh, this, kids can be kids, or kids will be, little boys will be rambunctious, or, that little girls are sad. These, they're going through developmental stages, but just really taking an honest look at some of the issues that I have had presented to me, and then figuring out a good way to approach administration, approach school staff, and figure out a way that we're going to address it a little bit better than what we have.
And I let them go first because this is the challenge of my lifetime right now. I'm graduating in May, and I went into this program because I care about these issues, and I know that we need to do better in education. So I am thinking about what are the biggest levers for making changes in schools. Does that mean district leadership? Is it supporting in some other way? Is it the university? There's so many ways to address it, but seeing everybody here and the collective impact that's possible in this room, and then bigger than that, I'm thinking about how do I continue that work. So.
Well, I want to thank the panelists today, both Sabrina, Shashina, and Tina, for being here and sharing their expertise with us, and thank you for your questions.
And we're going to do a quick switch over here to the next group. I'm going to, I want to thank the four of you, Dr. Burkhart and almost Dr. Owen Moore, and not yet Drs. Robinson and Bartels, for your excellence and for your involvement in the everyday work of helping kids. The next group, taking the field, this is like, the next game of the NCAA tournament. We'll switch more to the state level, the policy level, and we have four excellent voices to listen to here today. I'll start with as they get their microphones on. Thank you, Ryan. Closest to me here is Julie Inciti, who is the social work consultant at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Her areas of focus include school mental health, trauma-sensitive schools, professional ethics and boundaries, child welfare, school attendance, and pupil records laws. She was previously a school social worker herself and is a past president of the Wisconsin School Social Workers Association. Moving to the left is a new member of the Wisconsin State Legislature, Assembly Person Lakeisha Myers, who represents the 12th District on the northwest side of the city of Milwaukee. She was previously a school support coach for Milwaukee Public Schools, where her duties included working with the district's primary alternative education center, and prior to that, she was an education director for the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, and she is a member of the Assembly Education Committee. To her left is Joanne Yunke, who is the policy director for the last 6 years for Wisconsin Family Ties, which is a Madison-based nonprofit with a very simple mission statement: changing lives by improving children's mental health. She is a prominent voice on issues of the kind that we are discussing here today. She is co-chair of the Children and Youth Committee of the Wisconsin Council on Mental Health, and she serves on the board of directors of the Wisconsin Alliance for Excellent Schools. And on the left is Representative Joan Ballwig of Marquette, which is kind of central Wisconsin, okay? Former mayor of Marquette, and a longer term, 12 years, am I right? Member of the Assembly?
I'm starting 15 now.
15 years member of the Assembly. She is a member of the Assembly Mental Health Committee. She was a first grade teacher at one time, and she was just recently named by Speaker Robin Voss to head a task force on suicide prevention. So let me start. The general question I'm interested in is, what can government do, and especially state government? All four of you have roles in Wisconsin advocacy and government. What are you seeing as policy issues? Where can we make progress? And what's ahead? So I'm going to ask each of you to make, in effect, an opening statement on that. Let's start with Julie.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's wonderful to be up here with such distinguished people. So a place where government can really affect change is through policy and for prioritizing policies and funding. And so some places where I see that we have been doing some really great work in Wisconsin and continue to do great work is around funding for school mental health. So that's been brought up today already, and additional funding for school professionals to address school-based mental health, additional funding for schools to be connecting to the community providers, and providing coalitions of clinicians, law enforcement, youth justice, parents, and schools all coming together to look at systems and to improve systems, so increased funding there. And then also looking at that sense of belonging. So we know that an increased sense of belonging for students reduces their levels of anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. So how at the state level can we put in place policies that would increase students' belonging? Well, one of the ways that we do that is through our equity agenda and looking at how we can provide inclusive and welcoming spaces for all students. This is for everyone in the school community. And some of that work also then includes working through a trauma-sensitive lens. So we prioritize at the Department of Public Instruction our Trauma-Sensitive Schools project to make sure that our staff are supported and have the perspective of understanding where students and families are coming from to be able to meet them at a place where they're at. So to increase funding and that for that program and training, and then also our social and emotional learning competencies to make sure that we're not only supporting kids with learning those, but with supporting the adults as well. And that's really a third area of focus where the state can do a lot of good is how are we supporting our adults in the school community, all of our professionals in mental health across the state, and then particularly in the schools, so that, do staff have the time? Do they have prep periods? Do they have their lunches? Do they have substitute teachers when they do need to take a day off or have a chance to go to training? Do we have our priorities right in that respect? And then also staff mental well-being as well. So earlier it was mentioned the Compassion Resilience Toolkit that's available, great work between the Department of Public Instruction and Rogers, and that is looking at supporting staff with their mental well-being, looking at the whole system in schools and communities for supporting those adults, because adults can't be present for kids with mental health challenges if they're struggling with so many stressors themselves and don't feel supported. And then once government has prioritized policies and funding, what we can do at the state is then go to the local community and say, what do you need here? Who are your stakeholders? Who are your leaders? Let's get them together. Let's look at the needs that you have in your local area. Let's look at the strengths you have in your local area and try to find ways to match your strengths to the needs, to increase your strengths, increase the community connections, and then the state can sit and be champions and be problem solvers and continue to provide that funding where it's making good sense by supporting the local community, so that the programs and structures and systems would look different in each area.
Representative Myers.
I agree with everything Julie said.
We'll move on then. No.
In addition to that, I will say that I think we have a unique and enriching opportunity with looking at Act 185 at the state level. And for those of you who do not know what Act 185 is, that is the Lincoln Hills Copper Lake closure and the revamping of juvenile justice in this state. So I think on top of everything else that you said, I think we have a unique opportunity to look at how we service and not just, to quote Charlotte Moore, build beds to house people and to house children, but also look at some of the programming that we have, really invest in programming as far as counseling services, as far as looking at students' mental health, as far as their education. So looking at that so we can actually turn it around and do some preventative measures. So I think that's something to look at when we look at juvenile justice from that perspective. On the adult spectrum, having worked in the Department of Corrections, I think when we look at the Department of Corrections and their budget, which is the largest that we have in the state, looking at what we look for with mental health. The prison system and jail system is the largest houser of mental health patients that we have. So we have to move away from the aspect of looking at it from a law enforcement perspective and locking folks up that have these mental incapacities and looking at treating them and actually expanding our mental health services that we have in the community, as well as when folks are incarcerated, getting them the services, whether that be AODA treatment. It shouldn't take you 12 years to get AODA treatment, but it can take you that long because we don't have enough practitioners or services in the Department of Corrections. So if you went in for a drug program, why does it take so long for you to get that? So we have to look at how we're allocating the resources that we're giving to that particular department. As you talked about with looking at from a teacher perspective, because I'm a teacher at heart, I understand full well what it looks like to have 45 people in one class. Anybody in here ever juggle 45 different personalities at one time? Okay, some teachers are in the house, we know how to do that. So you get, 3 is okay. I can help you with your homework, tell you to tie your shoes, and have you help her learn how to read. But when you got 45 different people and there are not even enough seats in the classroom, and I have kids doing work and trying to get the lecture notes on top of a radiator, I've been there. So when we look at that, when you talk about staffing, and I think, I can't remember her name right here, from MPS, the school psychologist, she would be able to tell you, sometimes the school psychologist has to man the lunchroom. They are doing special ed testing, and they may have those all day on one day. And like she said, she's in her building 3 days a week. When we look at how we allocate resources in the school system, what is most important? The kids are the most important part. So if we know that the research says that we have to have 80%, contact with these students and these families, let's put the backing and take her out of doing the other stuff and put her there to be engaged with the student and not say, oh, we got an extra pair of hands, so we need you to man the cafeteria line because the lunch lady is sick today. So all of that kind of thing happens. We have to really shift our focus of how we utilize people in our buildings and really make sure we're getting the best impact in those school districts every day. And I think that happens. Another thing that policy-wise we can do is I think we're starting to shift this way with the state legislature in particular. We had the Blue Ribbon Commission. And they talked about what were some of the things that we needed across our state, and I think we need to implement those things that they talked about, not just give lip service to them, but put the funding behind them. We know that our funding has shifted in this state in education, for the last 8 to 10 years. So we need to really reinvest in that and make sure that we're putting our money where our mouths are. So I think that is something that we can do.
Joanne.
All right. So I wanted to just start out by telling you a little bit more about Wisconsin Family Ties and sort of where my perspective comes from. So our organization, as Alan said, we're located in Madison, but we work statewide, and we work with families of children and youth with mental health issues, and specifically with the parents. So our parent peer specialists do much of the work that our organization does. We are parents ourselves of children who have social, or emotional, or mental health, or behavioral health needs. And being able to go and work parent to parent to help folks navigate the many different systems. Because if you've got a kid with a mental health issue, they may be involved in the education system, the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, and a lot of these systems are in different silos. We've also heard today about just the importance of not feeling isolated, of being in community, and that's one of the things that that lived experience parent-to-parent, parent-peer support can do is bring that perspective and that trust and that been there, done that, to be able to help work through whatever issues it is that the family has. So that's where we're coming from, and so that's from a policy perspective, that's a funding opportunity right there. Is support for taking this model even further statewide. But from a policy perspective, we're coming from looking at potential system change in all of these areas that our children encounter and our parents, our families encounter. And one thing that we see very much as we help families with these separate systems is how siloed things are, and each of the systems has its own barriers and its own language, and they may not be talking to each other. And if you're, it's hard enough to deal with even one of them. And so as you're dealing with, sort of layers of this, Wisconsin does not truly have at this point a children's mental health system of care. We don't have all of the pieces put together in a system. And so this is, we have siloed pieces that do good work often in many of these areas, but they don't, we don't have a system that's across the board. That all feeds into each other and all talks to each other, and so I think that there are major opportunities to work on that cross siloing and what would a system that was all working together look like from the ground up. One potential place to dream about how that might happen would be creating a separate children's mental health code in statute. That would be a place to tease out the current mental health code, Chapter 51, was written a long time ago, decades ago. We know a great deal more about about children's brain development, adolescent brain development, and children and families are not. Mental health issues are not the same as with adults, and so there are other models out there. Minnesota does a separate children's mental health code. That would be one place to work. Since we've been speaking intensely about education, I'll just throw a little bit more out there because much of the work our parent-peer specialists do with families does have to do with the education system because almost all of our kids are there, right? When we think about policy and think about, I've really appreciated how much we've heard about relationships and connectedness because that's where learning and safety can come from. Is the connectedness, and when we start with that, think about that as a place to begin for policy. It feels a little disconnected from policy, but then when you take it and look at the resource needs and what would enable that connectedness to happen, and what would give teachers the space to not be in those classrooms with 45 kids, smaller class sizes, what would get us to the place of having the counselors available when the kid comes and knocks on their door. Then that definitely becomes a policy and a resource issue. And I think there are some major opportunities with the proposals proposals as we go into the budget cycle to fund not only children's mental health, but special education is also a children's mental health issue, and also frees up a substantial investment in special education would free up resources that are currently having to come from elsewhere to meet our special education obligations.
If I can just say one thing before I turn it over to Representative Ballweg, actually two things. One is, this is not a Milwaukee problem.
Absolutely
This is a problem in Marquette and Ripon, whatever. It's a statewide problem. It's a nationwide problem. And so having you here is especially valuable. Plus, there was a session at Ripon College a few weeks ago. Frankly, I was supposed to be there and wimped out at the end because of icy roads. But I heard that you were there and you were a very positive, strong participant in that. So I want you to pick up from there and
Well, one of the things I was going to say is my part of central Wisconsin is very rural, but it doesn't really look a lot different than a lot of areas of Milwaukee that have stresses with low income mental health issues, high suicide rates. All of those things do translate around the state. I wanted to take this conversation a little bit from what's happening in schools that you've all covered very well, but also address the pipeline for those kids before they get to you in school. And I've been a big advocate when it comes to addressing the 0 to 3 or prenatal to 3 space for our young people as they come along, because there's a lot of preventative measures that can come along in trying to help students build resiliency, those that are actually affected by adverse childhood experiences and trauma. I'm a big fan of James Heckman and a Nobel economist that has received his award because of the Heckman equation that shows that early investment in children does things like help them in school and keeps them out of jail and has a better health outcomes in the long run. So those are things that I think that we're trying to promote through our budget. We have added money for home visiting with the development of what myself, Senator Darling, and a couple of the legislators have done over the last couple of years in the development of our Wisconsin Legislative Children's Caucus is to try to help our colleagues understand that this is important as an investment. Some of the things that you've done just recently here at Marquette with the president's investment in the Challenge Grant is very important. The partnerships you've had with Penfield is very important in trying to address these particular needs. I'm also a member of the Children's Neglect Abuse Prevention Board, and many of the things that we do as investments that come from state investment, that comes from when you buy those children's license plates, those are all things that are used to help evidence-based pilots to make sure that there are things that are going to move forward in being positive for our youngest kids. I did also want to mention there was a lot of discussion about the lack of treatment availability and professionals when it comes to counseling. One of the things that we've invested in over the last couple of years, and again, Senator Darling and several were major supporters of this. You started out with a speaker from the medical college, and that's the physician consultation line. So when you're looking at mental health, your primary care providers are actually the first line of individuals and professionals that will be able to ferret out some of these situations. And it is the consultation line that is not everywhere in the state. Many, I'd say, because not every health system is interested in participating, but here in Milwaukee and in northern Wisconsin, the consultation line is for our primary care physicians. So they have someone that they can call to talk over a case, get some kind of expertise. Many of the healthcare nowadays is talking about we need to upgrade some of the background in teaching for our primary care physicians so that they have a better sense of where they're going to go forward in trying to help young people, adults, as they come in to see them in their clinics, because they are most likely the first people that someone is going to go to if they have some kind of a situation.
A lot of the things we've discussed here this morning cost quite a bit of money. Increasing the ratio of, or improving the ratio of students to counselors, for example, or just in general, services for students who have been bullied, students who have mental health issues, depression, whatever. How do you draw the line between what's available and what's good? You know, how do we draw the line meeting these needs? And obviously, I would put that in the context of both the state budget, now under construction, and the, dare I say, warm and fuzzy atmosphere in the Capitol these days between the two parties. I mean, I don't know how people are going to reach agreement on a state budget by this summer, but nonetheless, where's the wall that separates what's doable from what might be nice but isn't doable? Let me start with Representative Ballweg.
Well, I think it's a matter of priorities. So there's going to be discussion about how much money we actually want to put in this budget, whether we're going to increase taxes, whether we're going to move some of this money around from one pocket to another. I think those are all the priorities that are discussed among all the members. They come out in the public with the Joint Finance Committee and their votes, and in the next 3 to 5 weeks, there's going to be public hearings on the budget. So everyone is available to contact their legislator about what their priorities are, or go to one of those budget hearings and have your 3 minutes in front of those folks. You're much better off actually talking to us individually. You know, because we have more conversations with the folks that are doing those things. So I think we have we're, as I mentioned with the Children's Caucus, we are very intentionally trying to build the capacity of our colleagues to understand what the long-term gain is. What is, that's what the Heckman equation is about. What is the return on investment of providing funding at the very earliest ages to help us avoid some of the higher costs when we get into our schools or coming into contact with law enforcement. So that is what I would encourage all of you to do, to take a look at these individual things as they're coming along and understand that we would like to do everything, but we also have the challenge of just how much of everything we can afford.
So yeah, I would I would add to that that for those of us who are approaching from an advocacy perspective and who who don't have to do what our representatives have to do, which is make the make it all balance out. But I think that that we need to ask for what we need. We need to make the case for can we afford not to do these things? It's been my experience sort of across advocacy, various cycles, that funding gets found for what folks truly prioritize, and so I think that that's the perspective that we need to go in with is to have these conversations with with the perspective of can we afford not to do some of these things, and what is it that we value? I mean, our budgets are statements of our values essentially when you come right down to it.
Well, one thing I will say is that money answereth all things, and you have to understand that we have a certain amount of money that we have to deal with the state budget, and we do have to make it balance out. So will everything get addressed in this budget? No. Tell you that right now, no. But I would agree with what you said, that you have to figure out what your priorities are and put your money where your mouth is. We have to pay for, what you put into it is what we get out of it. And that's the return on investment that we have to understand. We all know we have terrible roads. So we have to put money and invest in that we need to fix them. Same thing with education. We all know this is, like Alan said, this is not just a Milwaukee problem, it's a statewide issue. I'm sure you could, I wish they had that presentation that we had in committee, where you could see all the little dots over the last, 10 years of how much poverty has increased in our state and how many students now qualify for free and reduced lunch. So it's not just a Central City issue, it's not just a Milwaukee metro area issue. If you see all the little dots in northern Wisconsin, you'd be like, wow, okay. So it's an entire state issue. We have neglected education. We've neglected mental health. We see how those go hand in hand. We have to now invest in those to repair the damage that has been done.
And I also think it's important for legislators when looking at how to prioritize funding in the budget to not only look at how different programs will impact the budget fiscally, but how the programs and policies will impact families and what those outcomes will look like. And then we have some case studies that we can look to throughout the state. So communities have already been working on these issues and have been doing amazing things. And we can see when they've gotten certain types of funding from the state or from the federal government, what they've been able to do when they focus on their systems working together. So we have examples of communities where the county has worked together with the mental health providers, youth justice, law enforcement, schools, and parents, and making sure that those systems are all working better. And so if we know that funding worked in those areas, how can we replicate those types of programs that are already working?
And my last question, and then we'll take however many questions we can get in from the audience. These are mostly educators in the audience here. Report cards. What would you give as a grade for Wisconsin state government and how it's handling youth mental health issues broadly as of 5 years ago, as of now, as of what you hope will be true 5 years from now? We'll start with Julie.
Well, what I can definitely say is that the grade's improving, right? So it's definitely was improving under Walker. His wife did a lot towards working on children's mental health and trauma-sensitive practices, as well as putting some money in the budget around school-based mental health particularly. So that's improved, and I see improvements going forward. It's a bipartisan issue, folks coming together on both sides of the aisle, saying this is important, that we're focusing on this issue now and talking about mental health and mental wellness for all of our residents in Wisconsin, and I see that continue. So as we see the priorities and the funding put behind the discussions around mental health, then I see improvements. So I think we're on a good track.
I would actually say well, you said 5 years ago, right? Within the last 5 years. The only thing that keeps popping up into my head is Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake. When you talk about how children were treated, and when the bulk of those children come from my community, the only grade I can give you is an F. And that is because there are racial implications that have gone along with that. There are societal implications that have gone along with that. So when we think about how equity was not involved in that process, and how when you have the combination of children and families, and you have the combination of mental health issues and everything else stacked on top of that, the only grade I can give is an F. But as you said, the only way to go up from an F is to, raise the playing field, okay? So I think the grade and the shift is moving. We will not get there overnight because it did not happen overnight. But I do think that with the climate that's in the legislature, with the advocacy that is going on across the state, with people looking at working with their counties and doing regional rehabilitative services for students that are in juvenile justice and combined with the mental health services, I think we're getting there and we're moving in the right direction. We're not there yet because Lincoln Hills is still open. So we're not there yet, but we're actively working and engaged on trying to put all the pieces in place to get all the kids back to their respective communities and also get the services that they need.
So Representative Myers raises a really good point that what grade you give depends on which slice of the issues you're looking at. Yeah, part of me also wants to say, well, I wasn't the teacher, but yeah, I think that I think that there are. What we need to be looking at is opportunities to raise the grades. In the different pieces, and Lincoln Hills Copper Lake is a great example where we've identified where we know that we've been on the wrong track and we are in the process of improving. I think that there are opportunities in the educational opportunities in education in terms of resourcing, in terms of partnerships and cooperation that we can, that there are opportunities for those grades to move upwards as well. So I think that I think it's maybe not the most helpful thing to try to put an overall grade on how we're doing as a state, but just say that we have an awful lot of opportunities to move the needle, and that's what we're engaged in. That's what we're about.
And I can't deny what Representative Myers talks about with the situation that's been at Lincoln Hills that needs to be addressed. It was something that was finally brought to some conclusion toward the end of our last session, and I think it was like a unanimous vote to move forward to change what was going on. So that was put into place right now, and it's up to Governor Evers to move that forward. I appreciate that Julie mentioned that things are getting better, and as it was mentioned, I've been around doing this for a long time, so I'm just going to tick off a couple of things that we have done over the last couple of years. In 2013, the Speaker put together a task force on mental health, and we had a large number of proposals that came through that were stepping up in many areas. There has been continuous work when it comes to looking at criminal justice reform, and so that is moving forward in a bipartisan way. I mentioned the consultation line a little earlier. We've had task forces that have moved quite a number of policy issues forward and provided funding when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia. And as it was mentioned earlier, I'm going to be leading a task force that's starting right now on suicide prevention. And our goal is to have policy initiatives available so we can run them through the legislature into the fall of this year to do some very positive things. I also wanted to point out the school safety grants that went out at the end of last term. People think about the school safety grants that they were all about communication devices and hardening entrances and those kinds of things, but it was required as part of those school safety grants to do trauma-informed care training within the schools and have more of the faculty and staff understand those relationships and what those are. And what I appreciate that you mentioned a lot of the work that excuse me, Mrs. Walker started with several of us in the legislature and many partners, the medical college, St. A's, which has been talked about, and many other advocates, that why we started the Children's Legislative Caucus in the first place. But her advocacy has brought Wisconsin to a good level of understanding when it comes to childhood trauma, ACEs. We've been held up among the nation for the work that we have done. Not that we are finished by any means, but all of those things has provided the impetus for additional funding and understanding to try to move these forward. So when you talk about breaking down the silos and you talk about communities coming together to work on these things, we have over the last, I'd say, at least well, 6 years now, been really moving toward that. And I don't think we'll ever get to the point of being perfect by any means, but we are really moving the ball in these areas.
We have time for, well, maybe one, maybe two questions from the audience, depending on how it goes. Yes, sir.
We have a lot of young adults going into Lincoln Hills, and is that really the right choice? If we're going to take somebody that we've talked about earlier, needs physical education and needs to have a positive outlet for their energy, and then we lock them in a cage, basically? Why is that answer what happened before, and now in the new legislature and governor's office, they're talking about building 2 new prisons for youth?
I'm gonna be honest, I couldn't hear the last part of what you said.
The legislature and the governor are talking about replacing Lincoln Hills with 2 youth prisons. Why are we using prisons for youth?
Well, I would say that the idea is not, the Lincoln Hills is going to be, and always was intended to be, converted into a medium prison, because we do have extreme overcrowding in the prisons, but the facilities for youth are to be considered a secure treatment facility, not at all a prison category. And you've been in Department of Corrections. You understand even better what this means.
So what we're transitioning from, I believe Lincoln Hills right now can hold about 300 people, if I'm saying that correctly. What we're doing is building regional facilities, 2 different types of regional facilities. There's a type 1 facility, which is the state-run facility, and the type 2 facilities that will also be less restrictive, I guess, facilities that are treatment facilities that will be run by the counties. At least that's what I'm understanding for Milwaukee. So I think what you're asking, I'm trying to answer the question that way, is that, number one, Lincoln Hills right now is 4.5 hours away from Milwaukee. So if you had a student that was here from Milwaukee that was sent to Lincoln Hills, we don't have that many severe offenders that should be at Lincoln Hills right now. So the bed count, and Charlene is back there so she can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Thank you, I'm looking at you. So I believe with the county facility, it will house about 40 students that are in the type 2 facility. So that is focused on mental health, treatment, and preventative measures. The more restrictive facility, which will be run by the state, DJC, which will also be in the city of Milwaukee, will house about 32 to 36 beds as well. So that facility will be still working on the same issues, but those students will have committed more egregious crimes, if you will. But they'll still be getting some of those similar services. They'll just be run by the state. The purpose in that is that you don't want people to be so far away, because we still had equity issues at Lincoln Hills, you know, with cultural competency that was not followed. We still had issues where, you know, beating and all that other stuff was going on there. So the point was to get students closer to their home area. So that's why there are the local facility or the regional facilities.
And I think what you're recognizing is that if we put money into prevention and into supports that are good for kids and families early, then we reduce the need for things like detention and locked up centers later. And if we put our priorities and funding into creating systems and environments around kids and families that are trauma sensitive, that are focused on the whole child, then that can help prevent the need for those facilities later.
And I would add to that that an earlier focus on problem solving over punishment. I'm just thinking of the extent to which our children with our students with emotional behavior in the emotional behavioral disability category, the number of suspensions, the rate of suspensions that is so much higher than any other category of disability, and that if we were focusing on problem solving rather than punishment at that point, could we get to the point where we were not needing to have this level of where the offenses weren't happening because we weren't.
And you see that starting earlier, even with Milwaukee Public Schools. We had the OCR report that we had just last year, the year before, and have started to look at how many students are being suspended, how early they are starting to be suspended. I'm talking about kindergartners. Mm-hmm. Now, if you can't control a kindergarten, we have a whole different conversation. But, okay, with kindergartners being suspended and students being suspended at the level that they're being suspended and what they're being suspended for. So MPS has taken, a look at that and started to implement procedures in place of, like you said, punishment versus, prevention. What can you do to alleviate this process from even starting? Because we've looked at the combination of that, at how students are being suspended, and that goes into the whole, prison pipeline to prison and all of that.
I'm going to stop the conversation here with some regrets because there's lots of things to discuss. We're going to do one more quick turnover here, so Dr. Melissa Holt can come back up with Mike Goucher to share some thoughts on what she's heard here this morning. While we're doing that, I want to say a couple things. One is to repeat there will be a box lunch available just outside the door here when we wrap up in a few minutes. Also, the tables out there with information. Also, Boswell Book selling Tino and Moore's new book. But I mostly want to say thank you. Thank you to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and Gannett USA Today Wisconsin for all the focus they put on this issue in the last several years, and for being the initiators and the spark plug for this event, and great cooperators. Thank you to the Marquette College of Education for being a partner and a big contributor to this morning, and to the wisdom and thoughts that were presented here. Thank you to my direct employer, the Marquette Law School. We like putting on these kind of events. We like doing these things, and we have the support of the leader of the law school, Dean Joseph D. Kearney. As I should also point out, Dean Bill Hank of the College of Education is here. The leadership here wants these kind of things to happen, and we really appreciate that green light. And we have, as you can see before your very eyes, a great team that pulls these things off as far as all the logistics with remarkable smoothness and class. I want to thank two people, one of who's gotten attention here already, and that's Rory Linane, who's really been at the heart of making this happen. And one of whom has gotten no attention here and will be very upset that I'm mentioning her name, and that is, she's standing in the back way right now, the Rita Alaman, who is the program manager of the Lubar Center here at the law school, and who's made so many of the details link up here and been responsible for so much behind. And last, and perhaps the biggest thank you, is to all of you. You've been great participants in this, and not just an audience. By the way, I think everyone who signed up here today will be getting an email in the next several days with a link to audio and video of this whole conference. I believe the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel is also going to do this on its Facebook page and on its web page. And we have been live streaming here this morning. So we want this to be not a standalone event. We want it to be part of a conversation that has already started and that will continue and that should grow and yield great results. So let me turn this back to Mike and to Melissa Holt
Alan, thanks
for some thoughts.
Thank you very much. Before we get started, we'll ask Dr. Holt for some thoughts about what she's heard this morning, but you brought your book with you too.
I remembered the title and brought it up here. Critical Issues in School-Based Mental Health, Evidence-Based Research, Practice, and Interventions. And someone kindly noted, apparently it's also on the blue sheet.
Okay.
As an additional note, I would love for people to purchase the book or get it from the library, but I've also co-authored a chapter with Jen Green and Javier Guzman that's called School Settings. It's the Oxford Handbook of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology. That, if anyone emailed me, I could distribute for free, and that sort of gives a snapshot of something we talked about today, as well as providing some examples of evidence-based practice that schools could implement. So that's another option.
And again, each chapter in there deals with a specific type of concern?
So the chapters, there's an initial set of chapters that deal with the specific types of concern and provide resources and programs that may be effective. And then the latter half of the book deals with some particular topics, including bullying, interpersonal violence. Someone had asked about family engagement. There's a chapter on family engagement. There's a chapter on sexual minority and gender minority youth. So it's a nice spectrum. And then it closes with a chapter on universal prevention to support child mental health needs. So it sort of captures the range of issues we've been talking about today.
And evidence-based strategies for dealing with these concerns.
And I think when Amy Girls and I started thinking about this book, we didn't feel like there was one compiled resource that offered the overview, again, of these different topics and then really linked them to evidence-based practice. So most chapters have links to websites and so forth. So it gives you, in addition to the book, some great resources to go from there.
That's terrific. So you've been listening all morning. What are your takeaways? What jumped out at you that you heard this morning?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I think that, so I appreciated the diverse range of panelists, and as always, I think the youth voices, I know some of them are still here, and young adults really stayed with me. I think that thinking about the last panel, there was conversation around the realities around budgets and allocating funds, and I think that's all very real, and I think we all agree that more funds need to be allocated, and there's some clear ways that those can be done in ways to improve the lives of youth that would have an economic payoff in addition to a huge well-being payoff for kids in the long run. I was also thinking about across every panel, I think there was this sense of people saying we need positive school climates, we need people who care, the youth saying we need people to reach out and say, how are you doing? And to make it okay to talk about these things. And that just got me thinking around the fact that yes, we need funding, and there are things that are being done and can be done that are free. Having climates that you walk into that feel welcoming for all kids, having adults who care, having it be okay for kids to feel like they can talk about that with their peers. I think even something that you said reminded me of screenings. It is free to do either an anonymous or identifiable screening in a school that gets a sense of the landscape of what's going on in your school so you can better target resources. The same goes for bullying prevention. If you find out what's going on in your school, you may be able to address particular types of bullying that are occurring more, but also like we had talked about, it's a free intervention as a start to say it's occurring a lot in X place in the school, we're gonna add more adult support there. So I think that just really stood out to me. All of these pieces about developing this community of care can be done without any resources. And certainly then we need resources to add on to them. But I think I just wanted to acknowledge that. That's a lot of what I heard.
I agree. The students, we've heard several people refer to that panel, and I think it was powerful on a lot of levels, but it was essentially being told, all of us being told, these are things we want to talk about. Ask us about this. Don't be afraid to ask.
Absolutely.
Don't think it's not your place to ask. Tell us, ask us, engage us. I thought it was very interesting.
Absolutely. And I also had the sense of, and don't minimize it.
Yeah.
These are serious things going on for us, whether they're mental health concerns or bullying. Don't say it doesn't matter. Realize the significant effects it's having on us and help us get connected to support.
I was going to get your reaction. Something that struck me when you talked about how we view discussing these kinds of issues, that sometimes they're viewed as the soft stuff.
Mm-hmm.
How big, from your perspective, is that as an issue, that we do not view this as fundamental to a kid's ability to learn?
Absolutely. I think that can be a challenge, right? That it's not important enough that the role of schools is just to address academics. I think what was said before is really true, that these are skills that take kids throughout life and help in positive ways. I think we also know sometimes when I'm working with schools, the thing that can sell schools is to say, listen, when kids are struggling with mental health concerns, when they're being bullied, academically, they're not performing well. So even if schools, at the end of the day, say our job is to educate kids, if kids aren't coming to school because they're afraid, if they're struggling with mental health concerns, if it doesn't feel like a safe space, they're not going to learn and they're not going to have the positive academic trajectories.
Another thing I heard today from one of the students was that in that student's particular school, bullying was not a problem or an issue. Why is it so different from school to school? What is the difference?
There certainly are differences. I think we can point to some things, just the tolerance of bullying behaviors, the extent to which staff, from teachers to staff throughout, will say that's not okay. I think in schools in which there's a clear message that these behaviors aren't going to be tolerated, then there's less bullying. I think it also speaks to the need to be able to assess what's going on in your particular school. Yes, we can give average rates from the research field about who's experiencing bullying, but that doesn't necessarily say anything about your specific school. Maybe rates are lower in the school. Maybe it's a school that has particularly high rates of relational aggression, but not other forms. So I think there are differences across schools, and it's important to determine what those are.
The other big thing that I heard, and I think it was the second panel, is the issue of time. Having the time to be able to spend as much time with students, to be able to address all of the things that need to be done. Huge issue.
Absolutely, and I think that piece in part links to funding in terms of being able to have more professionals in there. And then I forget who the panel said this, but I really liked this idea of as school psychologists, as school counselors, being able to advocate for devoting more of the role to the primary purpose, to help kids. So even without funding, if those individuals can serve in terms of self-advocacy, to say, really what I need to be doing is supporting students. I think that's another avenue.
One final question, and we didn't get into this in our discussion earlier, but I want to ask you about the role of bystanders in terms of, we've heard talk about peers and the important role they can play, but bystanders play a huge role in the climate of a school. And you said there are strategies that can be very effective in terms of creating that climate and affecting the way bystanders view bullying, for example.
Absolutely. People have talked about as bystanders or upstanders. We know particularly for adolescents, programs that work are driven by peers and bystanders. And part of that is just, it's equipping kids with the skills to know how to intervene, and it's making bystanding okay and part of the culture.
How do you intervene?
Well, and that can depend. I think some kids think to intervene, I need to say something at that moment and help. And that may be it, but it may be providing support to the target. It may be going and getting an adult who can support someone. So giving sort of students a menu of potential strategies so they feel like they're equipped to deal with the situation when it arises is really important.
What's next for you in terms of your research on these subjects?
Still addressing all of them. I think, like I mentioned before, one of my current new movements and projects is thinking about identity-based harassment, and I think people have brought up this idea of today's culture and understanding what that's like for kids. And part of our work is even looking at, even if I'm not personally targeted by that, what is it like to be in a school where there's a lot of comments against immigration or something like that, and we're finding that really affects kids, not surprisingly. But I think that's a particular avenue for me. And actually, how do you prevent that and create kids who can engage in bystanding behaviors that might reduce those rates?
Well, again, thanks very much for
so
traveling
much.
from Boston to be with us.
I
Dr.
appreciate
Melissa
it.
Holt.
Thank you, everyone.
Before we go, I want to do what Alan Borsick did, but I'll do it in a very abbreviated version. I just want to thank everybody for being with us today. Our co-sponsors of this event, our tremendous panelists. You were all great. Rory and the good folks at Gannett and the Journal Sentinel and the USA Today Network, thank you very much for being with us. And most of all, thanks to you for having the interest and the time and the terrific questions that you asked today. We greatly appreciate it. As Alan mentioned, there's lunch out in the lobby. You can take it with you if you need to get back to work, or you can maybe hang out with a few of your new friends and talk about what you've heard. Again, thanks very much for being with us.